What's up, fam? Smash the like button for the algorithm and let's get started with the story. Vire van Baskerville served as a puppet and hunting dog of the noble house of Baskerville, following all the cruelties in his life for his family and father. However, he was unjustly accused of conspiring with a demon and ruthlessly executed as a victim of betrayal. Taking his last breath, Vire decided that if he got a chance at a new life, he would no longer follow the path of a pathetic hunting dog. By some miracle, Vire opened his eyes again and saw babies lying in cribs around him. He couldn't understand where he was or what was going on around him. The constant crying of the children and the heaviness in his body led Vire to think that his possible location was hell, where his soul had gone after the execution. However, the boy soon realized that he was not in hell but in a place he knew well, the mansion of the Baskerville family, where his former life had been destroyed. Earlier, the head of the family, Hugo La Baskerville, came to the nursery and scornfully examined the infants, calling them insignificant creatures unworthy of attention. Passing by the row of cribs, the man noticed that among all these children, there was not a single worthy one who could really interest him. But suddenly he stopped at one of the cribs where there was a baby he thought was different from the others, and this baby attracted him because it was the calmest. Hugo La Baskerville then ordered his servants to carry all the infants to the cradle of blades, where each child must pass a test. Vire, who found himself in the body of an infant, quickly recognized young Hugo La Baskerville as the man who had been the main culprit of his death in his previous life. Vire was flooded with memories of the past and remembered being a Baskerville hunting dog, growing up in harsh conditions as an illegitimate child. He did the dirtiest jobs of spying on threats, also that the seventh generation of the Baskerville family would become the strongest and most powerful in history. The reason for Hugo La Baskerville's kindness was simple. He cared only for the recognition of his family and the fact that his power was unquestionable and stable. 10 years had passed since the opening of the gates of the underworld. The battle ended in victory for humanity, but Vire was betrayed and executed, putting his life on the line. Lying in his crib, the boy was seized with anger and a desire for revenge against those who had ruined him. However, as an infant, he realized that so far his chances were nil. But when he heard that the babies were going to be sent to the Cradle of Blades, he realized that this was his chance to become stronger and gain the power he lacked. The Cradle of Blades was one of the trials for the children of Baskerville, where they were thrown into a maze of sharp swords to prove their mettle. At the end of the labyrinth was the river Styx, which, according to legend, could turn a child's body into steel. However, not all babies could reach that river. To get to the river Styx the fastest, the children needed to pass directly through the dangerous barrier of spiral blades. Remembering how in his past life his own brothers had prevented him from reaching the river, Vire decided that now things would be different. Watching the ordeal, Hugo La Baskerville and the rest of the family watched in amazement as one of the children was able to pass through the swords and jump into the Styx. While in the water, Vire decided that he would stay there as long as possible to receive the blessing of the river Styx, for its waters changed his body down to the bones. As the air began to run out, Vire began to feel unbearable pain but decided to endure it to get all the power the river could give him. Mr. Hugo's servants became concerned, fearing that the boy might not survive if he stayed in the water too long, and offered to get him out. Hugo went to the manager, John Barrymore, and asked how long the child had been in the river, to which he replied that it had been about 7 minutes. The head of the Baskerville family assumed that Vire would not be able to get out, but when he came to the water and saw him, he ordered his son to swim to the surface. Hearing his voice, Vire decided not to give up and drank as much water from the river as he could to absorb all the power of the Styx available to him at that moment. His breathing began to falter, but Vire continued to think only of how to stay underwater as long as possible, despite the hellish pain. When Hugo pulled his son out of the water, he was very surprised that the child had not just dipped into the water for strength, but had decided to absorb it to become stronger. Hugo then asked Supervisor Barrymore what the name of the child he was holding was, and the man replied that the child's name was Vire van Baskerville. Looking at the unconscious boy, the head of the clan noted that his son was born determined and greedy for power, which clearly set him apart from other children. The boy decided to follow a secret path to build up his strength and power so that at the decisive moment, he could eliminate Hugo and put an end to his long suffering. Vire van Baskerville vowed to wipe the house of Baskerville off the face of the earth with his own hands to avenge all that happened to him in his past life. In his past life, it was known to many that the illegitimate son of Hugo La Baskerville possessed outstanding talents and incredible abilities. Already at the age of 8, the boy was dubbed a genius for his high merits, although in his family he still continued to be considered a common and second-rate child. By the age of 20, Vire had begun to fulfill the tasks of spying and eliminating all undesirables, but this did not rid him of his feelings of inferiority. By opening the gates to the underworld in his 30s, Vire caused an invasion of demons that he fought, destroying those by the hundreds, which led to the conclusion of the great battle. However, at the age of 40, Vire was rewarded for his devotion as a hunting dog, but his reward was false accusations and execution by guillotine. Upon opening his eyes, Vire realized that he was back in the crib in the nursery. Hence, his ordeal in the river Styx had been quite successful. Rolling over onto his stomach, Vire realized that his new start in this life was better than the previous one, giving him an advantage he didn't have before. Suddenly, a strange woman entered the room with a beautiful box in her hands. The nanny asked the woman for what purpose she had brought the box to Vire's cradle. Without answering, the lady left the box and exited the room. Afterward, Vire thought that gifts were never given to illegitimate children and suspected something was wrong. Left alone with the box, the boy saw a bloody mamba crawling out of it, and this poisonous snake headed straight for him, preparing to strike. Looking at the snake, Vire remembered that only a few women of the Baskerville family were given the title of My Lady, and realized that this was an attempt on his life. Assuming that all the children in the cradle could be harmed, the boy decided to confront the snake before him to prevent tragedy in that room. Vire was the first to attack, grabbing 2 snakes by the heads to mercilessly disarm them, for he had sworn that he would destroy all who stood in his way. The next day, the servants of the Baskerville family came to Vire's cradle and were astonished to find the child sleeping under the bodies of torn, breathless snakes. Looking into the cradle, the servants saw the peacefully sleeping baby, who was in no way bothered by the remnants of the poisonous creatures. Rumors about him quickly spread. That same day, all the nannies working the night shift were subjected to brutal interrogations, but it was impossible to find out how the snakes ended up in the baby's cradle. Only Vire knew the truth about what had happened that night, and he wasn't going to share that information with anyone around him. 8 years had passed since that incident, and Vire sat in class with the other children, listening intently to the teacher, who began to explain the topic of sword masters. Looking at the students, the teacher talked about the classification of swordsmen, saying that beginners don't know how to use mana, while experts can control it. The teacher went on to explain that graduates were already able to emit liquid aura from their swords, while masters could turn mana into a solid substance. Masters, on the other hand, were those people who were able to alter mana and control it as they wished, making them some of the strongest swordsmen of all. Then the teacher noted that Hugo La Baskerville was a master of the sword, which amazed the students very much because such people were very rare. Realizing that Hugo already possessed incredible strength, Vire decided that he needed to urgently regain his strength to be ready for the upcoming battle. Suddenly, the teacher noticed that Vire was thinking and was once again convinced that the boy who had received the gifts of the river Styx stood out from the other students. Looking at him, the teacher thought that Hugo would be happy about his son's development if he knew about it, but the boy was thinking about how soon he would be able to eliminate his father. At the same moment, 3 boys looked at Vire angrily, and it was obvious that their intentions were not friendly. After class, the trio took Vire to the storeroom and, calling him a half-breed, claimed to know of his bastardy and began to humiliate him. The boys also mentioned that he was rumored to have spent 7 minutes in the river Styx, and that while still an infant, he was able to destroy poisonous snakes in the cradle. Looking at these tomboys, Vire remembered that they had haunted him in his past life and that it was they who had bullied him after the false accusations. The brothers' names were High Bro, Middle Bro, and Low Bro, and they were known as Hugo La Baskerville's Trident, each 1 year older than Vire. The boys accused Vire of lying and said that he did not like them. Realizing that friendship with them would not be possible in this life, he decided to eliminate them. Suddenly, one of the brothers held a knife to Vire's face, saying that if his body was really like steel, he would be safe from being stabbed. Brother High Bro beckoned to Low Bro, and he immediately knew what to do, quickly grabbing Vire and blocking his breath, intending to abuse him. Vire immediately assessed the level of their cruelty, and made sure that the rumors about them were true. These annoying brothers knew no mercy. After 3 minutes, the brothers were worried, for they did not believe in the delusional legend of the river Styx, and were sure that the boy would not last long. But even after 10 minutes, Vire continued to hold on, and the brothers were horrified at what was happening. Realizing that the legend was true, they began to panic. Low Bro, who continued to hold the boy, refused to believe in the veracity of the legend and did not want to let go of him. But Vire also continued to stand still, realizing their precarious position. In the situation, the brothers asked Low Bro to let Vire go because there was no point in their actions anymore. Letting go of the boy, Low Bro suddenly realized something terrible had happened and looked at his hand in horror, screaming in terrible pain. Vire immediately grabbed his hand, and when the brothers asked him what he had done to Low Bro, he immediately spat out their brother's finger, wiping the blood from his face. Vire smiled wickedly and reminded them that it was the brothers who first got to him and started using dirty methods. However, the two brothers said they were not afraid of Vire, but Low Bro was not so confident in his abilities because he had lost a finger and was very scared. The brothers didn't take it for granted to support Low Bro and said they would later go to the priest to have the finger put back in place, but Vire said they wouldn't leave. One of the brothers was angry at the words Vire had spoken and immediately attacked him with a knife, trying to punish him for his insolence, shouting that Vire was a year younger than them and trying to show his superiority. His brother stabbed Vire in the stomach. However, the attack was useless, as the knife only cut Vire's clothes but did not do any damage to him thanks to the effect of the river Styx. After knocking the knife out of the boy's hand and breaking him, Vire reminded him that in the Baskerville family, age is of no importance, for strength and talent are more important. Looking angrily at his opponent, and not letting go of his hand, the boy offered to have fun, hinting at a continuation. The frightened brother cried out in fright, asking if the rumors of his power were true, but he never got an answer from Vire. Deciding not to explain anything to the boy, Vire immediately struck a strong blow to the boy's face, knocking him to the floor. The brothers froze in fear as they saw High Bro collapsed on the floor with a broken nose, worried for their lives and not understanding what they should do next. But one of the brothers decided not to hold back his rage and prepared to avenge his injured brother, clenching his fists and ready for a fight. Before Middlebro could even lift a finger, Vire had already knocked him to the floor with a single leg kick, leaving him with no chance to retaliate. Realizing that Vire was not joking, the brothers screamed in fear, but the boy told them not to worry because they would be fine once they were treated. Picking up one of the brothers' knives from the floor, Vire said he wouldn't let them out of the room anytime soon, and if they resisted, they would be left crippled. Holding the knife in his hands, the boy still decided to change the rules of his game, saying that he would be magnanimous and let one of the brothers out of the room. The frightened brothers asked which of them he would let out, but Vire threw a knife in front of them and hinted that it was up to them to decide among themselves. Leaving the room, the boy turned around and said that he wasn't going to wait long, and that they should decide sooner if they wanted any of them alive. The brothers looked at each other apprehensively, and began to argue, for they really thought that only one of them would be able to get out of the room alive. Standing outside the door, Vire listened to the brothers fight, and was glad that he had been able to sow discord in such a friendly and unbreakable trident of Baskerville. Sometime later, Barrymore was giving an account to Hugo of the ruby mines, where the bloodshed of the Morgue family had taken place for those claiming ownership. Hugo replied that Morgue would soon come to the negotiations and asked if there was any more news, to which Barrymore replied that Vire had won first place in the calligraphy contest. The head of the family was pleasantly surprised by this news and his son's success, and asked the superintendent when the school children would have their practical test. Barrymore responded that the tests would take place in 5 days and that right now the young knights were on a mission trip preparing for those visibly nervous. The steward also informed Hugo of the recent big fight that had taken place among his descendants in the palace. Hearing this, Hugo was very surprised and asked the manager if there were any casualties in the situation. The man replied that there were no casualties, but that High Bro lost his teeth, Middle Bro had his jaw damaged, and Low Bro had lost the index finger on his left hand. The manager said that treatment was provided, but the brothers had psychological traumas. The head asked how it happened to those who were very friendly. Barrymore surprised Hugo by answering that it was because of the winner of the calligraphy contest, Vire, who brought the brothers to this state. The boy was then called into Hugo's office to discuss the fight, and he was very calm and ready to be questioned by his father. Upon seeing the boy, the head said that he had grown a lot, and Vire greeted his father, calling him Mr., which surprised him. Looking at Vire, Hugo said that he had heard that he had hurt the 3 brothers, to which the boy replied that he had heard that they had been treated. The head looked at his son and said that the problem lay in the boy's mental traumas because since that moment, the brothers no longer communicated. They were told that the 3 brothers did well in their exams, but they stopped eating together and talking, and the relationship between them soured after that incident. Hugo asked Vire if he thought his behavior was inappropriate because it was because of him that the quarrel had started, but the boy would not admit his guilt. Vire confidently stated that he considered himself much stronger than his brothers and did not admit his guilt because strong people do not make mistakes. The man then asked his son if he felt guilty because the brothers had recently visited him and said they forgave the boy generously. Vire smiled haughtily at hearing the words of forgiveness and remembered an incident from his past life. In the past, the last surviving daughter of the Baskerville family, being a nun, came to Hugo and told him that she forgave him for all his sins. Hugo looked at her with contempt and cruelty and answered her words with that single phrase, with a crazed look. Vire uttered the very phrase Hugo had said. Forgiveness is just an excuse for weak people who are incapable of revenge. Hearing his son's words, the head immediately recognized the motto of the Baskerville family and praised the boy for remembering this important truth. With that, Hugo smiled contentedly and turned to Barrymore with orders, pointing to Vire. He told him to bring him any snacks he wanted but warned his son not to be greedy and take as many as he could carry. The boy thanked his father, calling him Mr. again, and asked if he could have the chocolate. Then Vire and Barrymore headed for the exit, but suddenly Hugo addressed the boy again, calling him son. Looking after the boy, the man wished him good luck and told him to do well in the upcoming midterm exam. In conclusion, Hugo smiled and said that Vire had no right to lose to his relatives, but Vire did not consider the words of the head sincere because he understood that he was treated as a consumable. He clenched his teeth in anger and said that he would try. Soon, Barrymore and Vire arrived at the warehouse where the chocolate was stored, which was enjoyed by the female gourmet of the Morgue family. After looking at the shelves, the manager said that it was hard to get such a product, but Vire replied that he didn't want ready-made processed chocolate. Turning and looking at the cooks, the boy asked for the most flavorful cocoa beans to be brought to him. Manager Barrymore and the cooks looked at Vire in surprise, not understanding why he needed beans. Soon, the boy was brought a bag of red-flavored beans known as blood beans. While Vire tasted the beans, the cook told him that this kind of bean was very flavorful and that just one piece could make up to 100 liters of chocolate. Barrymore didn't notice the boy's bitterness and decided that he just liked chocolate so much that he ate the bitter beans raw. Looking at the boy, the manager thought that he was really an unusual and exceptional person for choosing only beans, although he could have taken something more valuable. The cook then asked if the beans needed to be processed for Vire, but the boy said he would take them as they were. Fixing his glasses, Barrymore thought that Vire had a rather strange preference for his age since children usually like sweet chocolate. However, the boy did not need the beans for consumption because he was going to use them for a practical test that would take place in 5 days. Vire already knew that on this particular day, something unprecedented and something no one expected would happen in the Baskerville family. The Baskerville family was known around the world as the Berserk family because of the harsh upbringing their children were subjected to from an early age to develop physical strength. Children had to run up steep hills and were not allowed to rest or sleep before a set time to adapt to the harsh conditions. The cave, he would be able to claim the treasure. Instead, he was haunted by the guilt of his actions and the loss of his brother. The letter ended with a warning to future generations about the dangers of greed and the consequences of betrayal. Vire, deeply affected by the story, realized the weight of the legacy he was inheriting. He understood that the allure of the treasure could lead to dire consequences, just as it had for Gain and Abel. With a newfound sense of purpose, Vire decided that he would not let greed dictate his actions. Instead, he would use the knowledge and power he gained to protect others and honor the memory of those who had come before him. As he stood in the glowing hall, Vire felt a surge of determination. He would not only seek the treasures of the dungeon but also ensure that he would leave it with his integrity intact. With that thought in mind, he approached the glowing ruby, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that he would do so with honor and courage. This cave, he still didn't get what he wanted. After much regret, the man decided to leave this dungeon and leave a message to his descendants to protect them from a similar fate that befell him. Gain strongly advised to get out of this dungeon at once because this bloody lair only mocks people who will get nothing here. Disappointed, Fakir realized that the man meant to say that he had come all the way here and was left with nothing, but he didn't have a twin brother. Then the boy thought that the essence of the assignment did not change from this, and most likely Gain and Abel did not decipher the assignment correctly. As Vire continued to think hard about this task, he was sure that there were no impassable dungeons. As he approached the skeleton, a shadow reflected from its body. Then he realized what the answer was and how stupid the brothers had been. Because they were two of them, they were stereotyped and couldn't come to a decision. The correct answer to the question was in the postmonial itself, with a light-colored stone cave contrasting with the dark corridor on the way to the cave. The man is swallowed up by the darkness in the corridor, but upon entering the cave, he encounters the light of the ruby and splits into two, casting his shadow. When darkness falls again, the last level of the stone cave is opened, and recognizing that the answer was a shadow, the boy broke the ruby with his hand. After Vire shattered the red stone, the shards of it floated up and began to emit a mysterious energy, and a bright red-pink light. Looking in front of him, Vire realized that it was the relic of the Devil's Lair that had caused the brothers to fight and risk each other's lives. From the shards arose a mysterious sword called Beelzebub, and on the pedestal, it was stated that only a man of the Baskerville family would be able to pull it out. When he saw the sword, Vire wondered if it was an artifact for remembering his past life. As a child, he had seen references to it in the pages of a mythical book. According to ancient myths, the voracious fly Beelzebub was an unprecedented demonic monster that invaded the continent. It was said that the world had been swallowed up by a terrible demonic constellation known to all as the Seven Great Disasters. Then the heads of the 7 clans opposed to prevent the 7 great calamities, and each of them dealt with a demonic constellation. The demonic constellation with which Fade, the head of the Baskerville family, was exactly the constellation of gluttony called Beelzebub. The remains of the defeated Beelzebub were kept in the estate of the Baskerville family, and based on legend, it was said that these remains could summon other demons. In the end, the legend was true, and the sword fell into the wrong hands, causing a great number of people to fall on the battlefield. Grasping the hilt of the sword, Vire said that this would not happen in this life, for this sword would now be his property. Suddenly, the sword turned into streams of infernal energy, and having lost its physical shell, enveloped the hand of the boy who had not expected such a turn of events. The energy began to ebb and flow into Vire's body and was soon completely consumed by it. Then, a demonic sword that was one with his body emerged from the boy's hand. Upon reuniting with the weapon, Vire rejoiced that this sword was made from the demonic constellation Beelzebub, and realized that he was very lucky to get his hands on it. Looking at the sword and rejoicing in his success, the boy wondered how strong one could become in this life with this weapon. Looking around carefully, Vire realized that there was nothing else of value in the cave, and it was time for him to leave. Suddenly, the boy felt something strange, for inexplicable things began to happen to his body. As he fell to the floor, Vire couldn't understand what he was feeling at the moment, for it was like intense hunger and dizziness at the same time. The demonic sword that had penetrated the boy's hand began to make eerie sounds, begging to be fed. At last, the exhausted boy got out of the cave, but a terrible hunger continued to disturb him, and his sense of smell increased because of his appetite. Suddenly, the sword possessed Vire's hand and pointed it in the direction from where the smell of food was coming from. The boy, unable to fight Beelzebub and influenced by it, headed down the path he had been given. Soon, the demonic weapon led him to the lifeless body of a hellhound, whom the boy had eliminated a little earlier. Beelzebub immediately pointed his blade at the monster's body and began sucking the blood of the one, and at that moment, the boy's damaged organs began to recover. Vire suggested that the soil and trees of Red Mountain might have dried up because of Beelzebub's hunger, and now it was necessary to quench his thirst because they depended on each other. Soon, Beelzebub was satiated, and one of the sword slots filled with Hellhound's blood, and the boy realized that he possessed a secret skill. There were rumors that Beelzebub had the ability to absorb enemy skills, and the scale of his absorption was close to infinity, so many people were deprived of their skills. However, at the moment, the number of skills that could be acquired was limited to 3, and the first one was Hellhound's skills. After realizing this and seeing it for himself, the boy understood that he could now adopt the skills of other creatures. Then Vire looked unseeingly at the nearby lifeless body of Cerberus, also fallen by his hand. In the next second, sensing the presence of food, the demonic sword reasserted itself and headed towards Cerberus's body to drink his blood. Sighing heavily, the boy told Beelzebub that he should not eat the monster whole because if the body was damaged, it would be difficult to explain what happened to his prey. Seeing that the demonic sword wasn't going to stop in devouring blood, Vire struck at Beelzebub and ordered him to finish his meal. Then the boy saw that all 3 slots were filled. One had Hellhound's blood in it, the second had Cerberus's burn skill, and the third had fast regeneration. When Vire saw the rat lying under the monster's body, he realized that its fast regeneration had come from the demon's sword that drank its blood during Cerberus's takeover. After picking up the rat by the tail, Vire realized that the burn skill he had picked up from Cerberus was quite useful because one of the worst kinds of pain for humans was burning. Looking at Cerberus's body, the boy thought that most likely the monsters for the test had already been prepared and it was worth waiting for the test to be completed since he had already done the task. Soon, the practical test was completed, and all the wounded and tired young men went back to the Baskerville family mansion. But the test was not over, and some of the bodies of the monsters that had fallen during the test were turned into shields and swords and given to the participants as trophies. One of the bodies brought in by the young hunting dog horrified all the Baskervilles present. This shocking information reached Mr. Hugo Law Baskerville, who could not believe his ears. Barrymore reported to the head that the 8-year-old Mr. Vire had crossed the boundary of the safe zone and then attacked Cerberus with a high threat level. The manager added that the monster had been eliminated as it had originally been badly injured by the barbarians, and then poisoned by the boy using a strong poison. No one knew where Vire got the poison from, and he didn't give any more details, saying that he was tired and went straight to the dormitory. Hugo smiled, thinking that at such a young age, the boy already knew how to lie, but at the same time, he had information, and information was a power that had a price. Barrymore was surprised that such a talented boy was born to an ordinary woman and a prefix to the surname Van and not Law, as the head. To which Hugo replied that he did not know. Hugo said that he is different from the previous heads of the family, and when breeding hunting dogs, he does not look at the pedigree of those because the main thing is talent and courage. Barrymore thought that the head might be so worried about his second son, who, as a pure blood, was not distinguished by these qualities and was already preparing for isolation training. After this conversation, Hugo ordered the young Vire to be summoned to his office, and he soon arrived at his door. Hugo said he was aware that Vire had eliminated Cerberus on the interim test, and asked how the boy had managed to do it. Keeping calm, Vire replied that he did it thanks to the chocolate he put down Cerberus's throat because it is poison for dog-like monsters. Listening to Hugo's speech, who realized that Vire had asked to be given chocolate for that reason, Barrymore thought that the head was doing a bad thing by pelting his son with such questions. Looking menacingly at the boy, the head of the clan asked him why he had not answered questions about the attack on the monster earlier. Looking intently at Hugo, the boy said he would answer only to his master, and no one else. The man asked Vire who his master was, to which the boy replied that being part of the Baskerville family, he considered his master to be the head of the Hugo family. Hugo was pleased with the boy's words and said he would give him all the monster bodies from his hunt at the exam and anything else he wanted as a reward for first place. Realizing that he could get what he wanted, Vire decided to use this opportunity and said he wanted to go to Manson's library. Much to the surprise of Hugo and Barrymore, this library was a huge repository of books located in the center of the Baskerville family mansion and ranked at the top of the entire empire. Hugo asked how the boy dared to ask this, knowing that only blood relatives of the head or heads of the clan could enter. Without abandoning the thought of sneaking in there secretly, Vire replied that he was willing to retreat if the head wouldn't allow it. Suddenly, however, Hugo agreed and sent him to the deepest part of the library to read a book called The Six Fangs of the Baskerville. Vire was amazed because previously none of the illegitimate second-rate children of the family were allowed to read this book, and could not even reach the 4th level. The boy realized that he had level 6 in the past, and the head was now at level 7, but the Hugo from his past life could bear as many as 9 fangs. Vire couldn't forget how despised he had been in his previous life because of his bloodline, so in this life, he was determined to surpass Hugo. The boy realized that he now had the opportunity to receive a study guide from the head of the rural generation of Baskerville, who had defeated the 7 disasters. Looking at his son with excitement, Hugo Law Baskerville ordered the boy not to fail his expectations, for it was he who had given this rare opportunity to Vire, implying that the chapter had not yet realized the value of the other books in the library. The boy looked at the man and said he would try to live up to the expectations. After talking to Hugo Law Baskerville, the boy went to the mansion library, and as he approached the doors of that library, he saw 2 guards in front of the entrance. Walking through the library doors for the first time, Vire was overwhelmed with unimaginable emotions and found it hard to believe that this was happening in reality. As he approached the bookshelves and saw the titles, the boy realized that here were many books he had wanted to study in his past life. The Baskervilles' policy was not to allow future hunting dogs to bare their fangs to their master, so second-grade offspring were not allowed to exceed the 4th level of swordsmanship. Finally, Vire found the book he needed, which was chained and guarded like a treasure. Taking out the key that opens this book, the boy said that he never dreamed of such a thing in the past and never thought that Hugo would recommend a book about the 6 fangs. Turning the key in the keyhole, Vire assumed that Hugo might think that a child of 8 would not read the entire book in a day and so allowed it. Having studied levels 1 through 4 of swordsmanship in his past life, the boy had never been able to create a 5th fang without true knowledge of the 5th level. The sword arts of this kind were divided into levels. The first level was the first fang, and so on, and the appearance of fangs was accompanied by a black color. However, Vire was not interested in level 6. His real purpose for coming to the mansion library was something else entirely, for he longed for a higher level. Soon, the boy came to the entrance of the library where the guards were standing, and they looked at him in surprise, asking him if he was going to leave the place. Then they told him that the sword manuals were deep inside, and if the boy forgot something, they could bring him the right book. Vire replied that he wanted to read a few more books before he left, so the guards could ignore him and go about their business. Seeing the boy heading for the 2nd floor where there were only collections, the guards said that given the opportunity, it would be better for him to read books on sword wielding. The guards looked at him and said that the boy obviously didn't realize the value of the books yet, and Vire was glad to hear that the guards had succumbed to their delusion. In fact, among these many dusty collections was an incredible treasure that the guards didn't even know about. Going up to the 2nd floor and examining the books there, Vire finally noticed something interesting that caught his eye. Pulling out an old and tattered book with intricate letters on the cover, the boy realized he had found the book he was looking for, titled Hidden Ambush. This was a book of the basics of the first level of swordsmanship that even the native children of the family wouldn't see, but because of some torn out pages, it's not really important anymore. Flipping through the pages of the book and smiling wickedly, Vire looked contentedly at the one, for he knew its true value. In a past life, a squad of Vire's hounds found a strange artifact in a dungeon that was located on the border of Red Black Mountain. This artifact was a passage from a sword manual. One of the torn pages was written in Baskerville's handwriting. When Hugo sensed that this was no ordinary leaf, he turned over the entire mansion library to find the corresponding book, that is, the Hidden Ambush. Perhaps this book was created by one of Baskerville's ancestors and describes a way to reach the 10th level of swordsmanship. Eager to reach the 10th level, Hugo unleashed his hunting dogs and found the location of the remaining 6 pages torn from this book. These pages were in 6 families like the Baskerville family, and Hugo declared war on these families by releasing hunting dogs to fight against their enemies. The hound dogs managed to deliver the remaining pages to Hugo, but this was possible because they sacrificed a huge number of hounds. The reward for his work was a single phrase from Hugo, who said that the hunting dogs had handled it well without regretting their losses at all. Remembering this, Vire resented how miserable his past life had been, for Hugo had managed to move from the 7th to the 9th level at the cost of the lives of many dogs. The boy was determined not to let that happen in this life because he was the dog who had found all the pages and knew their contents, and now he had access to the book. Reading the lines about the first step to the 10th level coinciding with the solar eclipse, Vire thought that the person reading it would find the book pointless. However, if you put the information of the book together with what is written from the torn-out pages, the content of the book begins to add up to a puzzle, creating a marvelous masterpiece. The boy decided to reach his former strength before the age of 15 because in his past life he was a graduate of the elementary level, and now he wanted to have the highest level. Studying this important book diligently, Vire didn't notice how quickly the time flew by, and the darkness outside the windows was replaced by bright light, and morning came abruptly. Closing the textbook, the boy decided that he had read enough, so it was time to call it a day and leave the mansion library. Seeing that it was a new day, Vire realized that he had spent the whole day reading, but he was able to read the whole book and memorize all the necessary information. Rising from the floor, the boy did not feel the presence of guards and realized that no one would interfere with him, and he could test his new knowledge. Vire realized that he could not acquire all 10 fangs in such a young body, but at least there was a chance to reach the 5th level not available to him in his previous life. Born a bastard son in a previous life, Vire's relatives condemned him for his lack of swordsmanship without regard to his merit. Not wanting to live such a life again, the boy opened all his fangs and concentrated all his strength to open the 5th fang and attack the imaginary opponent. Of course, in the place of his opponent, he imagined the appearance of Hugo La Baskerville, wishing with all his soul to dissect him with his whipping and powerful blows. Resentment and anger fueled Vire, and thanks to this and the new knowledge he had gained, the boy was able to increase his power level, and he struck the most powerful blow. When the boy finished practicing his new attacks, streams of powerful aura still lingered behind him. Looking at his hands, the boy realized that despite his current weakness, he had still managed to bear his 5th fang as he had wanted. Vire was insanely happy and was even ready to cry with joy because he finally managed to reach the 5th level of the Baskerville family. Suddenly, the boy realized that his hunting dog's fangs were growing, heading towards Hugo at a speed unprecedented in the history of Baskerville. Now, after such success, Vire had to gain mana, and then he would be able to rise higher than in his previous life. Looking at his hand, the boy realized that his mana amount had also continued to increase after the training, and it was most likely due to the experience he had gained. The liquid aura enveloping his hand signified the level of graduate level obtaining. The boy had reached the entry-level graduate level at the age of 8, when in the past he had only reached it at the age of 30. The graduate level differed from his past expert level, with an aura changing from gaseous to liquid form and having a higher density. Realizing that his sword level had also become higher than in his previous life, Vire was determined not to stop and reach the limitless 10th level. Now, Vire's attack called Piercing Fang could become much stronger and much faster, but it still had limitations in development. Compared to it, the attack called Hidden Ambush had a perfect level of swordsmanship, combining defense and attack without any limitations. Putting the book on the windowsill, Vire thought that he could rise to a mid-level graduate with a high probability if he only decided to do so. However, there was one problem that only consisted of the need to hide the skills from the head of the Hugo Loss family for a long time. Taking something out of his pocket, Vire realized that he must not appear too weak or too strong to get rid of Hugo's scrutiny. This object in Vire's pocket turned out to be a magnifying glass with which the boy projected a ray of sunlight onto the book and set it on fire. The book flashed instantly, and the boy made sure that in this way neither Hugo nor his hunting dogs could reach the 10th level. At the moment of burning the book, the guards suddenly approached the boy, and hearing a strange odor, they asked him where the smell of burning came from. Vire did not hesitate and replied that he had accidentally left the magnifying glass on the book and it had burned, and if it was necessary to report it, he would tell the manager himself. A conflict arose when the guards expressed relief that there were only old collections and admitted it was their fault for not keeping an eye on them. Vire deliberately stated that this collection was not useful and suggested that Barrymore should not be disturbed by it, as he was dealing with the question of the morgue mines. The guards replied that if the boy turned a blind eye to it, they would do the same and pretend the book didn't exist in the library. Heading for the exit, Vire apologized for the inconvenience, and said it would be their little secret, to which the guards readily agreed. Once the boy left, the guards remarked that Mr. Vire was a very good man because he was in their position as servants, and did not want to stir up conflict. Vire was glad that the guards did not investigate the circumstances of the incident with the book and simply took his word for it, not wanting to be punished. After leaving the library, the boy arrived with his report in the head's office, where Hugo asked Vire if he had benefited from the trip to the Manson library. The boy replied that it was probably good for him, and looking at his son with interest, the man smiled and asked how he felt being in the library. After a moment of thought, Vire replied that he felt something sharp, soft, warm, and tiring at the same time. Hugo and Barrymore were surprised to hear this, as what Vire described seemed to suggest he might have sensed an aura. Aura was proving to be fully immersed in the world of blades. However, even the smartest students must constantly work to reach at least the entry level by age 15. Looking intently at Vire, Hugo did not understand what he expected from this 8-year-old and told the boy to demonstrate his skills. Smiling broadly, Vire replied that he would be happy to demonstrate his skills to the head of the Baskerville clan. After the conversation, all participants went to the training arena, where a large number of spectators were seated in the stands. Once in the arena, Vire looked confident and drew his sword, preparing for a showdown. Watching the boy, Barrymore asked Hugo how he decided to test Vire, and the man replied that he wanted him to kill a suitable monster. Hugo Law Baskerville had prepared the hungriest and most aggressive monster for the boy, and at that moment, the gate behind which the creature was held opened. A huge, sinister monster was brought out of the cage to face Vire, restrained by a large number of bulky chains. This brutal creature was an orc of medium threat level C, who looked at the boy with hatred, waiting to tear him to shreds. The students watching were horrified to see such a fierce opponent, as such a terrifying monster was too dangerous for an 8-year-old child. However, if Vire could not handle this monster, the knights would have to help eliminate the orc, who was half the height of the boy. When the opponents saw each other in person, Hugo ordered the orc to be released and the battle to begin. In the next moment, the large and heavy chains straining the monster's entire body were removed, allowing it to move freely within the arena. When the aggressive and angry orc felt free, it became furious and looked at its opponent with hateful eyes. The next second, the dangerous monster rushed to attack Vire, who stood his ground without fear. The orc swung at the boy, but before he knew it, Vire had used his sword and severed the orc's arm. All the students and spectators were shocked by Vire's fighting skills, as he was able to injure this monster so severely with the first strike. Even the orc itself did not expect such an outcome, and roared in sharp pain at the loss of its limb. Vire continued to attack his opponent, striking the monster's legs with another blow. The orc's foot struck the boy with a precise kick, causing him to fall to the ground. As the sinister monster could no longer stand, the boy thought that this time the orc's fast regeneration skill wouldn't be able to work. This would not happen thanks to the boy's use of the Hellhound skill from the second sword slot, which exceeded the orc's recovery power by many times. The audience was amazed by the abilities of the 8-year-old boy, as such power was impossible without the use of mana, and they could not understand how he had such abilities. Gazing intently at the boy, Hugo was also very shocked by his son's skills. Vire looked at Hugo and decided to show the man what he had longed for, the skills he had learned in the Manson library. Vire's newly acquired skill, which he unexpectedly exposed to the spectators in the arena, turned out to be the Aura Blade. At that moment, a snarling and weakened orc, seeking revenge on its opponent, began to rise from the ground to attack the boy. The monster's eyes burned with anger and bloodlust, and it roared loudly, alerting Vire to the danger he was in. However, the boy rushed to attack the monster while applying his new skill called Aura Blade. Watching the fight, a shocked Barrymore remarked that Vire was a rare genius because he had the aura of an entry-level sword expert, which surprised Hugo. The manager was sure that such a genius would not be found in any other clan, but Hugo was concerned and ordered him to stop this reasoning. Barrymore then noticed that this orc was very strange, as it couldn't even stop bleeding with its regeneration. Hugo replied that this was the reason the boy was able to defeat the orc, and the manager realized that the man just didn't want to praise Vire. As they were talking, the boy turned his gaze to them and interrupted to make a request that surprised the head of the family. With a bright smile on his face, the boy asked if Hugo had anyone stronger than this orc so he could show off all his skills and abilities in battle. Hearing Vire's words, the spectators in the stands were horrified, as they had not expected such results from the boy and were unprepared for him to ask for a stronger opponent. As he waited for the head's reply, Vire thought it was better to show the allowed part of his powers, as someone might notice his skills and he might have a chance to get away from Hugo. The boy realized that he had a chance of being sent to a distant district, or academy. Thinking over Vire's words, tension flickered across Hugo's face as he said that obviously orcs from faraway places were not up to his son's level, and at this age, the boy's skills needed to be developed. Hugo was pleased with his son's eagerness and asked Barrymore about the availability of creatures captured for the barbarian's subjugation experiment. The manager replied that there was only one individual left, warning that the monster had been hungry for a long time and had become even more aggressive because of it. Nevertheless, Hugo ordered the creature to be brought into the arena. Seeing this creepy creature, the boys in the stands were horrified, as they had never encountered such foul monsters in person before. Vire, on the contrary, raised his head with great interest and regarded the new monster without a drop of fear. Before the boy appeared a huge, dangerous, and cruel troll shrouded in chains and 10 times larger than Vire himself. Without taking his eyes off the monster, Vire asked Hugo if he could proceed to start the battle, and the leader coldly replied that he didn't care and allowed him to proceed. In the next second, the troll, freed from its shackles, rushed towards the boy. Vire did not hesitate and attacked the monster. The aggressive creature struck first, shattering everything around it, and causing a cloud of dust to rise. Vire, meanwhile, used his agility and speed to dodge the blow and found himself behind the creepy troll's back. The monster didn't have time to realize where the boy had disappeared to, and Vire distanced himself and took a defensive stance. The audience shouted in frustration that Vire had missed a great opportunity to attack the troll from behind but had hesitated and lost the chance. However, Hugo praised the boy's actions, saying that this maneuver was a good decision. At that moment, Vire knew that trolls have excellent regeneration abilities, so inflicting light and non-fatal wounds on an enemy wastes their strength. This is why hunting trolls requires special strategic skills, and the boy was quite good at it. Skillfully dodging the attacks, the troll soon stopped to rest, as it was already exhausted. After seeing the boy's decisive actions, the audience thought he was truly a genius, as at such a young age he could think of tactics to fight such a monster. A bit exhausted, Vire realized that the troll was too slow and not a threat, but at the same time, he needed to put on a little show. Vire needed to eliminate the monster as naturally as possible because if he unleashed all his powers, he was bound to get into trouble. Thus, the best option was to use the troll's power against itself, and the boy did just that. The very next moment, Vire successfully executed this maneuver and remained unharmed while his opponent collapsed to the ground with a loud crack. During his attack, the boy also managed to deliver a powerful sword strike and wounded his opponent badly, causing the latter to howl loudly in hellish pain. Everyone watched the fight tensely, amazed that Vire was able to wound a troll with only a first-level skill when no other 8-year-old was capable of such a thing. When the boy heard this conversation, he thought it was due to Bab's ability, as it would have been impossible to do so with only the first level. At this point, the head said that Vire could stop fighting and not put himself in danger, but the boy replied that he would not stop because he was almost done. Resolutely looking at his opponent, Vire asked to wait a little longer, and soon the outcome of the battle would be clear. The boy also said that he would accept his defeat on the condition that he could not eliminate the troll during the next attack, which puzzled Hugo. After looking at the furious monster and appreciating the confidence and fortitude of his son, the head of the Baskerville family agreed to continue the fight. Raising his sword and centering his aura around it, the boy already knew how much power he could bear. Before the audience, Vire was fully prepared for the monster's attack and wanted to show everyone the scenario of gaining enlightenment during the duel and moving to the next level. In the next moment, the boy exposed the amount of power he needed in front of everyone, and he was especially interested in how Hugo would react to it. With his sword held firmly in his hand, Vire attacked the troll with all the power concentrated in his weapon and took its head off in a second. Seeing the finale of the boy's battle with the troll, Manager Barrymore and all the spectators in the stands were simply amazed and speechless. The lives of the Baskervilles are formed from their sword, and usually, hunting dogs under 15 only reach the first level. After 15, the sword is filled with mana and emits an aura. However, for the first time in the history of the family, an unusual young man was born who was able to reach the second level at the age of 8, while his brothers could only reach it at the age of 18. Smiling happily, Vyre laughed and was pleased that he had managed to defeat the troll and mislead everyone about his true strength. But even this percentage of strength shown to Hugo La Baskerville had left him shocked and horrified. Looking at his son and the monster he had defeated, the man couldn't believe that a boy with no good bloodline could achieve such success at such a young age. It had been a week since Vyre had shown himself in the arena in front of Hugo and the rest of the audience, and now he was sitting in the dining room eating lunch, reluctantly looking at his plate. The boy thought that no matter how much he ate this chowder, he still couldn't get used to it. Noticing how everyone was avoiding him, Vyre realized that after that day, everyone was wary of him, but for such a strong young man in the Baskerville clan, it was only natural. The boy continued to recall with pleasure the expression on Hugo's face, who had frozen for a moment at what he saw and did not notice or hear anything around him. According to the official version, Vyre was an intermediate sword expert, but he was actually level 5 and an advanced level graduate. Looking at his hand, the boy thought that if he added the troll's skills absorbed by Bab to his strength, he would be much stronger than the rank of graduate. While Vyre was contemplating his increased appetite for the demonic sword, his peace was suddenly disturbed by 3 boys coming up behind him. All 3 brothers, known as the Trident of the Baskerville family, looked at the boy anxiously and uncertainly, wanting to tell him something. Thinking that they had come to bother him again, the boy became wary and clearly showed that he was not happy to see the trio in front of him. Vyre immediately told the brothers that they had suffered enough in their past conflict, but he would not hold back. To this, the boys replied that they had come for another reason. The brothers said that they admired Vyre for being able to defeat Cerberus and the troll. Hearing such unexpected words from them, the boy spat out his chowder. Frightened by this reaction, the brothers asked if the boy was all right, but at this point, Vyre thought they were trying to fool him using ambush tactics. Not trusting the boy's words, Vyre sensed something wrong and began to think about how to teach the trio a lesson again. But at that moment, Superintendent Barrymore came silently up to the boy and addressed him, which distracted him from his bad thoughts. Immersed in himself, Vyre didn't notice the manager approaching him and was startled by the man's sudden appearance. Adjusting his glasses, Barrymore looked at the boy again and said insistently that the master was urgently summoning Vyre to his office. At the same time, a fancy horse-drawn carriage arrived at the Baskerville family estate and stopped at the main staircase of the building. On the flag flying above the carriage were 2 hands with red rubies in them, indicating that the guests were people of the Morgue family. Soon, Hugo received the guests in his office, but it was obvious that this meeting was not a joyful and long-awaited one for him, as he was very serious and unwavering. His guest was the deputy head of the Morgue family, Adolphe Morgue, who turned to Hugo and said that he had not changed a bit since they last saw each other. Adolphe expressed hope that the annual event would go off without incident, as last year there was 1 wounded person on each side of the family. Hugo replied coldly that perhaps the young men of the Morgue family were skillful fakers. As to them, an ordinary scratch was a serious wound. Not happy with the head of the Baskervilles' response, Adolphe cautiously replied that their clan was very noble and had a sense of dignity. It was obvious that at this moment, there was a strong tension between the Devil Morgue bloodline and the Iron Blood Sword Baskerville bloodline that hovered in the air. Initially, the relationship between the clans was not so bad, as the previous emperor claimed that magic and sword were 2 complementary components. Based on these words, the Baskerville clan and the Morgue clan organized a joint annual training session for young men from 8 to 15 years of age. However, there was a problem in the form of ruby mines on the border of the territories of the 2 clans, which caused discord between the heads and started a conflict and bloodshed. Looking at Hugo, Adolphe said that he had already heard about the new star in the Baskerville family, and considered this event to be a great happiness for the whole empire. Hugo responded by saying that he was honored by Adolphe's words, but he didn't think there was anything special about the event. Hearing this, Adolphe was indignant at Hugo's strange reaction, as he did not understand the reaction of this unfeeling man to his own son's praise. Adolphe invited Simu into the room and told Hugo that they also had a joyful event in their family because a genius of this kind had appeared in the Morgue family. At this moment, a female figure appeared in the open doors of the room, and a girl with long red hair stepped inside. When the girl sat down next to Adolphe, he introduced her, saying that she was his sister Lean's daughter, and her name was Simu. Then Adolphe told Simu to say hello to the head of the Baskerville family, but the girl did not do so and only stared intently at Hugo. Instead of a greeting, Hugo heard words to the effect that it was he who had stolen the ruby rubrics of the Morgue family, and was obliged to return all the stolen goods. It was obvious that the head of the Baskerville family did not expect to hear such words directed at him, and he was amazed by the girl's rudeness and directness. Outraged at such a loud accusation, Hugo La Baskerville's gaze filled with rage, and he glared angrily at his guests. Adolphe was horrified that Sima had said such words, embarrassing him, but the girl replied that her uncle had been the first to say it when they were in the carriage. Hugo was angrier than ever to hear Adolphe Morgue say such vile words about him behind his back. Wishing to smooth the conflict, Adolphe said that there was obviously a misunderstanding, to which Hugo replied that the girl was still stupid and he had no desire to explain that she had been badly brought up. However, Sima decided not to back down and again told him to return the rubies because they were so few that they were not even enough for her research. Adolphe was horrified by the assertiveness of the girl. At that moment, Hugo could not contain his anger and said to stop it at once because now he was sure that the Morgue family did not teach manners at all. However, Adolphe interrupted the head's speech and asked why he was so rude to the child, as the best swordsman of the empire cannot allow himself to threaten an 8-year-old girl. Hugo replied that it was worth teaching the girl not to be jealous of other people's property. At that moment, the previously invited Vire entered the office and interrupted their conversation. At the same moment, Barrymore entered the office after the boy and reported that the young gentleman had arrived. The latter confidently made his way to his father, Hugo. Looking carefully at the boy, Adolphe realized that this child was the new star of the Baskerville family, who, despite his age, had already become famous. Then, turning back to Simu, the man noticed that the girl was no longer next to him and realized he hadn't seen her disappear from his sight. Simu, lightning fast, got right up to Vire and scrutinized him, asking what he had just said. Looking thoughtfully at the girl, the boy realized that he remembered her name, and recognized that he had known this stroppy person in his past life. This young girl turned out to be the very same Iron Blood Empress of the Morgue bloodline, and even in such a prestigious bloodline, she was called a genius among geniuses. In her prime years, Simu had eliminated the demons and barbarians of Red Black Mountain, and was known for building a wall of blood and ash out of their bodies. The girl was also nicknamed the Incarnation of Power because she conquered social circles with her extraordinary beauty, and even subdued members of the imperial family. However, Vire realized that this was all from the future, and now he was facing an 8-year-old girl who was consistently telling him about her family's ownership of the ruby mines. After listening to Simu, Vire said that the girl had traveled such a long way for nothing, only to throw this senseless tantrum. Watching the children, Hugo and Adolphe Morgue were surprised by the boy's directness, as he was not at all shy about expressing himself freely in front of Simu. Resenting Vire's harsh words, the tension in the room escalated. The girl was very angry because she thought her words were not hysterical, finally losing control of herself. Camu awakened her magic, and said that she was going to explain to this stupid boy that the ruby mines were their property. However, Vire continued to remain completely calm and confident, looking at Camu with a smile. He realized that this was about to be a lot of fun. Using her magic, the girl created a copy of the lands of the Morgue and Baskerville clans, and said that she would explain her point of view to the inconsiderate boy. Looking at the icy sample, Vire looked at the girl in bewilderment as his expectations included a battle with Camu, not a lecture. However, Camu began her presentation by pointing her finger at a mine that is in the common safety zone of the two clans, where quality rubies are mined. The girl explained that the entrance to the mine is on the lands of the Morgue family, and the underground dwelling under the Baskerville estate. But since the structure of the estate does not give access to the mine, the spring belongs to the Morgue family. Camu was outraged that the Baskervilles insisted on interfering with the Morgue family's ruby mining and refused offers of rent for the estate. Finishing her story, Camu reminded him that rubies are used as a magical ingredient and the Baskervilles are not interested in such a thing. After listening to her, Vire replied that it must be a shame for the Morgue family that no one from the Baskerville family would open the doors of their estate for a penny. Camu said that the Baskervilles claimed not to be interested in the rubies, and Vire confirmed this by saying that their interest lies in territories beyond which they should not go. Annoyed, Camu said she would prove to the boy whose rubies were whose, and pointing with her hands on either side of the territories, she showed where each one's possessions were. Then, putting his hand on the borders of the territories of the two clans, the girl asked him who he thought the hand passing through her territory belonged to. Vire grinned and retorted that he knew who the hand lying on the lands of his territory belonged to. Suddenly, he grabbed the girl's hand and said that logically speaking, Camu's hand belonged to him because it was on his property. Not expecting such a prank from Vire, Camu was embarrassed and blushed for a moment because she didn't think he would dare to take her hand. But when she came to her senses, the girl started to resist and asked Vire why she had to belong to him, because the very thought of it was ridiculous. Looking at Camus, the boy replied that he did not say that it belonged to him, but the girl did not understand what he meant because earlier he had said those words himself. Suddenly, after his words, Vire lightning fast pulled out a sharp knife from his belt that was hidden behind his jacket. Adolphe Morgue and Superintendent Barrymore clearly did not expect this from the boy and were horrified, worried that he might harm Camus. Clenching the knife firmly in his hand, Vire gave her a threatening look and said that not Camus herself, but her hand was now his property. The girl couldn't believe Vire's words, and terror froze in her eyes as she felt her life threatened. Even the most callous and unfeeling man in the room was shocked by his son's act. For fear that he might do something stupid, the very next moment, Vire confidently and ruthlessly raised his knife and pointed it toward Camus to threaten her with the loss of her arm. The girl was very frightened by Vire's antics, and immediately screamed and cried, asking her uncle Adolphe to help her. Adolphe Morgue appeared lightning fast behind Vire's back and with a menacing glare ordered the boy to release that one's hand now and step away from his niece. Taking advantage of the moment that the boy was distracted by her uncle, Camus quickly pulled her hand from his shackles and shivered. The girl immediately threw herself into Uncle Adolphe's arms, complaining about Vire, who clearly wanted to deprive her of her hand. Adolphe shouted loudly, expressing his displeasure at the situation because the boy's behavior was unworthy, and this time Hugo agreed with him. Looking at his son, Hugo said that he should be aware of his limits of humor because this case goes beyond all limits. Tucking the knife into his finger, Vire calmly apologized for what had happened, but it was obvious that he didn't feel guilty. Without much effort, he bent the knife blade with his finger, and said that such jokes were quite usual and normal for him and his brothers. Until tears came down from Camus' eyes, Adolphe Morgue continued to be indignant, not understanding how children could have such silly jokes. Realizing that the conflict could not be avoided, Vire bowed and apologized to Adolphe once more, saying that he had no intention of taking Camus' hand away. At that moment, Hugo intervened, saying that it was inappropriate for adults to interfere in children's games, but Adolphe obviously didn't like what he said. Then Hugo said that he had some thoughts about the ruby mines that might appeal to the Morgue family, and suggested they discuss it sooner rather than later. At the same moment, a distraught Camus turned to Vire, and said that she would not let him get away with it, and would definitely strike back. But the boy listened to her words calmly and unafraid of Camus. He didn't say anything back and just smiled at her. Soon, the joint training between the Baskerville and Morgue clans began, where the competitors took their places in the arenas and the spectators settled around. There fought young men from 8 to 15 years old, but the fights of older children were more brutal, being real confrontations in contrast to the fights of younger participants. However, this year at the joint training, all eyes were directed in a completely different direction because there were participants who caught everyone's attention. Everyone looked at the young and brilliant representative of the Morgue family, the well-known Camus Morgue. The second who attracted a lot of attention was no less important representative of the Iron Bloodsword family, and son of the head of the family, Vire van Baskerville. At the suggestion of the Morgue family, a confrontation between two geniuses from both families took place in accordance with the rules of true combat. At last, the bell rang, announcing the beginning of the battle between the heirs, and those were ready to start attacking the enemy. Looking at Vire, Camus Morgue told him to prepare for battle and warned him that she would not spare him. Already in the next second, the girl released her magic, which formed a mysterious circle, and she cast some kind of spell. The spectators in the stands opened their mouths in amazement because not everyone had to meet with such powerful magic in their lives. Soon, Camus formed 4 circles of magic and 4 elements around herself, and thus created a powerful quadro spell. Looking at Hugo hotly, Adolphe said that his niece had simultaneously used 4 magic spells that were beyond the reach of even 15-year-old children. Without making Vire wait for long, the girl released all 4 elemental streams she had formed earlier towards him. The boy easily avoided every element directed in his direction, using his speed and agility to do so. In response to Camus' magic, the boy said that those attacks looked awesome, but he advised her to focus on one spell so as not to waste her powers. The girl decided not to heed Vire's advice, saying that he was stupid and didn't understand anything about magic. The moment Vire rushed to attack Camus directly, the girl built a wall of sand between them in a second using earth magic. However, the boy broke through that wall in a matter of seconds, saying that calling him stupid was too much. A little confused, Camus realized that it was the boasted power of the river Styx inherent in the Baskerville family, for Vire had easily destroyed this wall of sand. Realizing that Vire was almost on her, and she would not have time to repel the attack, Camus closed her eyes and realized her blunder in the fight. But without feeling the blow or the pain, the girl opened her eyes and saw Vire in front of her, who had his hand on her forehead and was ready to slap her. The next moment, the boy executed his attack, and before she could recover from the shock and realize what was going on, Camus flew backward from Veyer's powerful slap. Watching the battle, Adolphe Mord was shocked by what he saw, for he did not expect that the boy's decisive blow could be a slap. Sitting on the floor after the blow, Camus looked angrily at the boy and said that he underestimated her strength, and she would not forgive such a prank by him. Weyer smiled haughtily and said that her forehead was obviously very sore because there was a large bump on it. Camus was very angry because the boy had advised her to give up and accept his victory, or else the outcome could be much worse than the abrasion on her face. However, the girl decided not to admit defeat and instantly erected a double wall of sand between them to buy some time and prepare to attack once again. Seeing the walls in front of him, Weyer heard the girl laugh and say that now he wouldn't be able to break two walls. Determined to refute Camus' words, the boy rushed forward to break down this barrier, and hitting the wall hard, he said he was about to catch up with the girl again. Before she could regain her senses, the girl saw Weyer's hand in front of her, which had broken through the wall, and was once again reaching for her face. Looking at Camus, the boy suddenly asked who the hand in front of her face belonged to, and the girl once again didn't understand what he was talking about. Without waiting for a response from the girl, Weyer prepared to flick Camus again, and brought his hand up to her forehead. Having hit her in the forehead, the boy replied that this hand belonged to the one who was stronger than her, and the bump on her forehead became even bigger and redder. Thus, Camus fell for Weyer's ploy again and fell to the ground with a clatter from a powerful flick. The girl was once again in sharp pain from the boy's attack, and tears welled up in her eyes as she looked angrily towards Weyer, screaming with anger. The girl directed a stream of fire at Weyer, but he deftly dodged, thinking that from such pain she would give up. He realized that he was mistaken because Camus was too stubborn. As Camus dodged the attacks, the boy thought about how to calm the girl down because if he had his way, he would eliminate her in a second, but then there would be an uproar. Noticing the other fighting students behind him, Weyer decided to quickly deal with Camus without getting his hands dirty. Behind the boy's back, a battle was taking place between a stupid fire mage wasting magic and an equally stupid swordsman trying to dissect fire magic with his sword. Suddenly, Weyer's musings were interrupted by an exasperated Camus, who asked why he wasn't attacking. Angry that the boy was distracted from the fight, Camus swiftly headed towards him, ordering him not to run away and to fight her properly. It was at this moment that the fire mage behind them prepared to attack his opponent, and concentrated power in his hands to create a fireball. Finally, the moment came when the apprentice directed his attack against the swordsman, and Weyer realized that this was the right moment to execute his plan. Saying the girl's name, Weyer quickly jumped up to dodge that mage's fire attack and advised her to prepare the girl's protective magic. Not expecting such a turn of events, Camus froze in horror because she did not even suppose that her opponent would win in such a way. Seeing what was happening in the arena, Adolphe Morgue stood up abruptly from his seat and shouted, not expecting that his niece might actually get hurt in the battle. The explosion that occurred in the arena was so sudden that flames and smoke filled the entire space, and all the students became invisible. The disciples of the Morgue clan who watched the battle were horrified, for their Lady Camus had disappeared into the wall of smoke and flame. Then Adolphe Morgue's cry penetrated all corners of the training arena, for the man thought that his precious Camus had been hurt, and he could not keep her safe. However, the girl was unharmed and heard her uncle's voice but did not respond to him because she was able to stop the blow with protective magic. But after that, there was another problem. The merciless fire had burned almost all of the girl's clothes, and she could not appear in such an unsightly state in front of her uncle and the rest of the people present in the arena. Realizing that soon the smoke would clear and she would be found in such a state, Camus despaired because she thought she would be ridiculed by everyone. But in her moment of greatest vulnerability, a jacket was thrown on her, and surprised by this, the girl raised her eyes to look at the man who was her savior. To her surprise, her savior was Weyer, who gave her his jacket and told her to put it on quickly as the smoke had almost cleared. Surprised, Camus asked why he was helping her since he was now without clothes, to which the boy replied that if she didn't need the jacket, he could take it back. The girl was in confusion because she did not understand why her opponent helped her and saved her from disgrace while remaining in such a disadvantageous position. Then Camus noticed that Weyer's arm was wounded, and looking at that, Weyer thought that that stupid swordsman's sword had an aura left on it that pierced through his steel body. Soon, out of the cloud of smoke appeared the men of the Morgue family, who were diligently searching for their precious Miss Camus. They saw before them a lady sitting on the ground covered by another man's jacket, and beside her stood Mr. Weyer with a bare torso. Soon the smoke cleared, and seeing his niece, Adolphe Morgue was glad that she was not hurt, while Hugo looked on silently and intently. The people of the Baskerville family were puzzled, for the one on the ground was Miss Camus, but the young Vire was bleeding, so it was not clear who had won the battle. Then they noticed that Vire was quite strong, thanks to the waters of the river Styx, and looking at his muscles, it was immediately clear that the boy often practiced. While those present were discussing the fact that this 8-year-old boy had amazing abilities, Camus, who was in the arms of her uncle, was looking at him with bewilderment. After the practice fight, Mr. Hugo and his son were on their way to the study, and the man asked the boy if he had enjoyed the fight with Camus. Vire replied that he was able to feel the significance of the event again, to which the head said that fights between wizards and between swordsmen are very different. Then Hugo asked the boy why he attacked at half strength, and Vire replied that he had hesitated because he had never fought a girl before. Paying attention to his son's wounded arm, the head of the clan said that carelessness in battle leads to injuries, so this will be a lesson for the boy. When Vire heard Hugo's words, he was surprised because he couldn't believe that his insensitive and cruel father could care about him. From his past life, the boy remembered only Hugo's coldness and cruelty, and many said that the head had become like this after the tragic loss of his first wife and eldest daughter. Deciding that the reason for this did not concern him, and he would not forgive his father anyway, Vire heard a sudden question about the ruby springs for which a fierce battle had been fought. The boy replied that they should give them up, to which the head was very surprised and asked why they should give the ruby mines to the Morg family. Vire replied that the main goal of the clan is to expand their territories, and that the Redfang Mine Mountain is home to creatures that are their big problem. By using the Morg clan in the right way, the Baskerville clan can minimize the sacrifices needed to develop new lands. Hearing this, the head was pleased with this answer. On this basis, having obtained the rights to own the mines, the Morgs will send many workers there who will lure demons and barbarians to themselves, and thus all problems will be solved. Hugo realized that the rubies would turn even redder, stained with Morg blood, and then the head of the Morg family would regret entering Baskerville territory. Such a strategy was perfectly in line with the head's plan, but Vire knew that that was the plan from the beginning, and he had to direct all the demons to the Morgs. As they continued down the corridor, Vire added that it was still necessary to keep an eye on the Morg's activities, to which Hugo replied that he had been gathering hounds to guide them to the mines for some time now. Suddenly, Adolphe Morg appeared in the corridor in front of Hugo and Vire, and they were surprised because they had not seen him appear. Behind Adolphe's back was a hidden Camus, who was looking intently and with interest in the direction of the young Vire. Looking at the head of the Baskerville family, the man turned to Hugo and asked for another conversation before they left the manor. Once in the office, Hugo asked what other questions the Morg family had, and Adolphe said there was one important topic left to discuss. The man said that rent was only one of the peaceful options for resolving the mine problem, and Hugo asked what else the man could offer him. Looking at the head of the Baskerville, Adolphe said that another possible option for a peaceful resolution to this issue could be a marriage contract between the families. The deputy head of the Morg family proposed a contract between a man and a woman from their families, and Hugo asked who he saw as candidates for marriage. Unexpectedly for Camus, the man said that he wanted to bring together his niece and the eldest son of the Baskerville family, specifying that the girl is a beauty and has no flaws. Adolphe thought that the eldest son of the Baskervilles, named Little Sunshine, would make a perfect match for his niece, but her eyes were fixed on another. After listening to Adolphe, Hugo replied that his eldest son would be 25 years old this year, and he considered it too great a difference in the age of the candidates. Camus was obviously not happy to hear this, but apparently Adolphe didn't care and said that the age difference was only 17 years and could be overlooked. Suddenly, notwithstanding the fact that her uncle was not interested in her opinion, Camus expressed that she would not marry a man who was weaker than her mother. Adolphe replied that the girl might not marry at all if she looked for a suitor stronger than her mother, but the girl said she saw that possibility. Camus did not want to have a chosen one with whom there would be a big difference in age, to which Hugo replied that she was not in the store to go through the options. The girl said that she was aware of the situation she was in, but she was also not going to give her consent to the first offer that she didn't like. After saying those words, Camus immediately turned around and directed her gaze towards the young Vire. Hugo did not immediately understand why the girl was looking at his son, but Uncle Adolphe, looking at his niece, immediately suspected what she was driving at. Looking at the Morgs, in response, Vire didn't immediately understand what she meant either. After revealing his niece's thoughts, Adolphe whispered in Camus' ear that Vire was not a first-rate heir with the surname Van, so he should not be chosen to be her husband. Hearing Adolphe's whispers, Hugo was immediately angry, thinking that this was out of line and that he was humiliating his son because of his lineage right in front of their eyes. Asking the boy's opinion of the situation, Hugo firmly stated that unlike the Morgs, marriage was not the most important thing in Vire's life. Pondering his father's question, Vire looked at Camus carefully and thoughtfully, pondering what answer to give to the Morg family. Finally, the boy finished his musings and stopped keeping everyone waiting by answering that he agreed to marry Camus Morgue. The expression on Camus's face clearly indicated that she had not expected Vire to agree to this, and Adolphe Morgue could not hide his surprise. Surprised upon hearing Vic's decision, the man became visibly nervous and angry, for he had expected the boy's rejection and was unwilling to give Camus in marriage to a second-rate heir. Camus thought that Vire didn't hate her after all and was a shyer person than she might have thought. Then Hugo said that the purity of blood did not matter in their family because even from the first grade, children with the surname Lee could turn out to be fools. But Adolphe still doubted, pondering the words of the head. Adolphe approached the boy and looked at him very carefully with an evaluating and hard look, as if to assess him as a commodity. Vire also looked at Adolphe Morgue carefully and stubbornly, not at all ashamed to look such an important man straight in the eye. Adolphe Morgue was known as the Sixth Circle Master and the strongest mage of the Morgue family, and he was also nicknamed the Evil Nephew. Foolishly appreciating the boy, Adolphe said that he should not say such things but scornfully informed Vire that he was too simple to be a husband for his niece. Vire thought that this man was not liked even by the warlord of the Baskerville family, but wanted to get a first-rate son of the family to marry his niece. Putting his hand on the young man's shoulder, Adolphe immediately realized that he had a strong body like a child and then asked why he was silent, because he had heard what he had been told. Looking intently at the man, Vire replied that the man himself had said he shouldn't say such words to him, so he didn't listen to him. Camus was amazed that Vire could say such barbed words to Uncle Adolphus, but Hugo was obviously amused by his son's response and audacity. Hearing the boy's impertinent answer, Adolphe laughed indignantly and asked the head of the Baskerville family for permission to speak privately with the young man. Hugo said that he didn't expect that being the best magician of the empire, he would dare to threaten a child of 8 years old, to which Adolphe replied that he was obliged to talk to the candidate for groom. The man said he was making this request not as a messenger of the Morgue family but as uncle. Camus objected and asked her uncle not to do so, holding back her anger. Adolphe laughed and ordered his niece to sit quietly, for he felt he should have spoken to this young man alone from the beginning. Then turning again to Hugo, the man asked what he thought about it, and the head replied that if it was so necessary, he would give his consent. After the conversation, all 4 of them were back in the training arena because Adolphe decided to personally put the young man in his place and check what he was capable of. Hugo and Camus stood outside the arena, anxiously awaiting the start of the battle between such a strong man and a boy whose forces were unequal. Looking at the boy, Adolphe Morgue turned to him, saying that he would evaluate the young man's outstanding skills, so he should show everything he is capable of. Replying in agreement, the boy thought that if the man really saw all the skills and what he was capable of, he would definitely faint. Unleashing his magic, Adolphe suggested a handicap as an advantage given to a weaker contestant to equalize his chances of success. Adolphe Morgue then used his magic to create a clay jug and filled it with crystal-clear water. Seeing this, Camus was amazed at how skillful her uncle was because he skillfully and harmoniously combined the magic of fire, earth, and water. Putting a jug of water on his head, the man said that he would fight holding it in this way, and if even a drop spilled, the young man would win. After hearing the terms of the fight, Vire thought that Adolphe was very strong. Even in his previous life, he was hard to compete with, so this fight would help him learn more about him. Looking back at his father, Vire assumed that this was the reason he had given him permission to fight because he wanted to see what Adolphe was capable of. Looking at who said to attack, the young man wondered what his chances of winning would have been if he had fought in his prime in his past life. Deciding not to fight at full strength but only to meet Hugo's expectations, Vire rushed to attack to finally test Adolphe Morgue's magic skills. At that moment, Camus was horrified and screamed, saying that he couldn't run straight at Uncle Adolphe because it was very dangerous. In the next moment, the man had built a strong protective barrier in front of him, and Vire's straightforward attack was unsuccessful as he failed to penetrate the shield. Looking at the young man, Adolphe said that when fighting a swordsman, the best attack is to use a shield because that's how you can hold back the enemy's attacks. Angry and focused on his opponent, Vire realized that it would be difficult to break this strong shield with a normal or a sword. Suddenly, Adolphe concentrated his magical power and looked arrogantly at the boy, saying that now it was his turn to go on the attack. In the next second, streams of Adolphe's magical fire were directed towards Vire, and he prepared to dodge the attack. At this point, Camus got angry and complained about her uncle's attack, who didn't even use this magic even in battle with her, to which Adolphe asked whose side she was on. As Hugo watched the battle, he noticed that there was no need to stop his son, as he moved with such speed that he could easily dodge the attack. The head wondered how his young hunting dog would act in a fight with a mage, but the boy, meanwhile, pondered whether Adolphe Morgue had all that power. Vire realized that if he combined the experience from his past life and his stronger body and skills from above, he might be able to eliminate Adolf. Concentrating the necessary amount of strength, Vire once again rushed to attack the man, trying to break the man's magical shield with his sword. Watching the young man's futile and pathetic attempts, Adolf said that he couldn't break his shield even if he hit it 100 times. However, Vire didn't listen to the man's words and persisted time after time with the same insistence, delivering powerful blows to the shield. As he continued to hold the shield, Adolf noticed that the young man was aiming at only one spot, and his movements were as precise as a machine, as well as his admirable concentration and sword skills. But after a little while, Vire's sword couldn't withstand the pressure and suddenly broke, bouncing off the shield and shattering into small pieces. After the incident, Adolf smiled haughtily and said that it was to be expected and the boy should have considered the strength of the sword and the strength of the shield beforehand. At that moment, Hugo and Camus, who were watching the fight, were shocked by what they saw, for they had not expected the boy to lose his weapon. Happy about this development of the fight, Adolf said that Vire was not that good and he was not worthy to become Camus' husband, but he didn't notice a drop of water running down his face. Already with the next second, water began to run down the face of the man who didn't even realize that the boy had managed to stab the blade of his sword into his jug. Adolf couldn't believe what had happened because the boy was obviously weaker than him, to which Vire immediately wished the man would enjoy the chill from the water and cool down a bit. Looking at the man, the boy smiled contentedly and clarified that he had said water from the pot. After realizing that Vire's victory may well have been accidental, Camus was embarrassed because she realized that he had proved himself worthy of marrying her, so in the future their marriage would take place. Looking at his son, Hugo smiled proudly and thought that the sword blade was in the pot not by pure chance but because Vire had calculated everything. After his son's victory, Hugo began to realize that apparently, Vire van Baskerville was growing up to be a more cunning and intelligent hunting dog than he had previously imagined. 7 years have passed since the battle between Adolphus Morg and Vire, but the action takes place again on the same Baskerville training ground. A huge and vicious monster appeared in front of the young hunting dogs of the Baskerville family, and roared loudly. Looking at their opponent without a drop of fear, the matured young men held their swords tightly in their hands and were in full combat readiness. Finally, the monster decided to act and rushed towards the boys at full speed, wanting to tear them to shreds. The young men decided not to yield to their opponent and grouped together to attack the monster, meaning to defeat it as a team. One of the students crept up to the monster's head and struck a strong blow on one of the horns to distract its attention. Using this opportunity, in the next moment, the students all rushed towards the dangerous monster to deal more damage to it. The fight was closely watched by Stepford Shire, instructor of Baskerville, and turning to the young men, he advised them to avoid fighting a stronger opponent. The man also said that one should not be greedy and aim at vital organs from the beginning because it would be effective to hit the hind legs to slow down the monster. Suddenly, from behind the backs of the students, someone rushed towards the monster with lightning speed that they did not even have time to notice who bypassed them because they were completely invisible. These hunting dogs turned out to be the well-known trident of the Baskerville family, and those without a drop of fear began to mercilessly strike the terrible monster. It was obvious that the boys had matured and their strength and skills had increased many times over, thanks to which they were able to deal with the monster in a matter of minutes. Looking at the exhausted monster, Stepford Shire praised the brothers for their progress, and made sure that this trio was strong enough and their Baskerville aura had finally matured. After catching its breath and regaining its strength, the evil monster once again rushed to attack the students, wanting revenge and devouring them all without a trace. Eager to win, the young hound dogs also rushed to meet the ghastly creature in order to finish the fight and eliminate it as soon as possible. Soon there was loud applause from the Stepford Shire instructor in honor of the victory of the heirs of the Baskerville family. The man congratulated the young men on the successful completion of their 7 years of training and mastery of the first level, for they were now entry-level sword experts. The instructor also said that the level of this caged bearcat is much lower than the level of a wild individual living on Red Black Mountain. Even the strongest elders can't cope with the savage monster, and compared to the actual battle experience, the experience of today's battles is simply negligible. After congratulating the young men on their graduation, the man said that they should win by natural talent, or with the help of experience gained, but the main goal was to stay alive. After the battle was over, the boys sat and talked about enlisting in different orders, discussing who chose which order for themselves. One youth said he chose 3 orders, Doberman, Pitbull, and Rottweiler, to which another youth said he liked the Wolfhound order the best. In the family of Baskerville, there are 7 knightly orders that were created for various purposes, namely vigilant search, guarding, suppression, elimination, and many others. Continuing the discussion about orders, one of the boys asked which order a guy sitting apart from everyone else could choose. This estranged young man was Vire van Baskerville, who was riding the breathless body of the huge and ghastly beowulf. The students discussed that Vire had single-handedly defeated a stronger beowulf than they had, and most likely one with the third level their instructors possessed. Not paying attention to these conversations, the young man reasoned that his progress took longer because in 7 years he had only managed to move from elementary to intermediate level. Vire was dissatisfied with his progress, but his musings about slow and unproductive development were interrupted by the suddenly approaching manager, Barrymore, who called out to him. Vire turned around to greet the man and heard a message from him that the head of the clan was looking for him and was waiting for him in his office. Smiling warmly and affably at the young Vire, the manager told him the secret that the master seemed to have finally realized the position for the young man. Soon, the young man arrived at Hugo's office and greeted him, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time and asked how the head of the family was doing. Without answering, the visibly aged Hugo stared sternly at his grown-up son, who immediately noticed a new scar on the bridge of his father's nose. Vire also looked at the man, puzzled, and stared at him, not understanding why he was silent. He asked where his father got the scar on his face. Running his fingers along the bridge of his nose, Hugo replied that he had been shot by a barbarian archer when the Baskerville fought those on Red Black Mountain. The young man asked if she had been caught, but the head replied that she could not be caught, but he remembered well the foxy face of this dangerous woman. Hugo then congratulated Vire on his graduation and told him that now his life would become even more difficult, and then the young man made sure that he would soon find out about his new position. In a past life, at this point, Vire became a trainee of the Pitbull Order and, like an unwanted dog, was sent to Red Black Mountain to engage in brutal battles. At the age of 15, the young men of the Baskerville family are divided into elite and disposable, where the former study politics and government. The disposable, meanwhile, take their own lives or help the elite in order for the elite to catch up with the disposable by the level of swordsmanship honed by those in battles. A fifth level was specially created, which was never reached by Vire. Looking at his father, the young man was sure that Hugo would never allow his illegitimate second-rate son to take an elite course, and would send him to fight his enemies again. However, the head of the family told his son that he was appointing him to the position of a member of the lower house, which greatly surprised Vire, who obviously did not expect to hear such words. Hugo explained that members of the lower house help to administer legislation to the court system and do outreach to local businesses. Being the illegitimate son of Vire, he couldn't believe that he had been selected for the elite course and would now be able to take charge of the Baskerville family's various affairs. Then Hugo said that the young man's achievements were at least 10 years ahead of the other students, so he was awarded the position of Deputy Sill of the city of Underdog. Looking at his son, the head asked if he agreed with the position, and the boy replied that he would follow his father's decree. But before that, he had some things to discuss. Vire said he wanted to talk about the ruby mines formerly owned by the Morg family, and the head immediately knew what it was about. The head replied that he remembered the promise of his son's reward and asked if that was what Vire was talking about, and he immediately replied that that was what he meant. Then the young man asked Hugo for a favor, which surprised Barrymore, who was standing next to him because his request was not modest. Determinedly looking the head of the clan straight in the eyes, Vire said that he would take a waiver from that if it was really hard for the father to do so. Outraged at his son's insolence, Hugo loudly and carelessly stamped the documents that lay before him and said firmly that he was refusing his son's request. But looking at the young man without a drop of anger or rage, the man said he believed Vire wouldn't do anything stupid. Vire said not to worry about it, thinking that he couldn't get used to Hugo calling him son and listening to his requests. Shortly after the conversation ended, Vire and Barrymore left Hugo's office and headed down the hallway toward the exit. At that moment, the manager turned to the boy, telling him that Master Hugo treasured his son very much, though it might seem otherwise. Barrymore said that apparently the head has big and grandiose plans for the boy because he was not sent directly to the battlefield, and even allocated a position of power. Not wanting to believe in his father's good intentions, Vire coldly replied that it could be discussed when he had excelled in his duties as subconsul. Despite this position, the young man realized that this job was not interesting but gave him the opportunity to safely develop his skills because he wanted to avenge the past. Leaving Barrymore alone, Vire headed away, determined to make Hugo Law Baskerville experience the same pain he had experienced in the past. Soon, the young vicer's appointment to his new position was confirmed, and he arrived at the Baskerville training ground in the town of Underdog. Knowing that an important man was on his way to the city, the supervisor turned to the workers and ordered them to clean the whole area to a shine because tomorrow the new subconsul should arrive. Looking at the boys, the man told them to pay special attention to the fact that this man was from the noble family of Baskerville, and they immediately took note of this information. When the man left them, one of the guys said he was interested in what the new subconsul would be like, and the other guy replied that he was rumored to be only 15 years old. Having come to the conclusion that they were doomed again because there was no telling what to expect from such a young subconsul, the guys noticed an unknown young man on the territory. Not understanding where the young man came from, the guy put his hand on his shoulder and addressed him, saying that outsiders should not enter this area. Turning to the employee, Vire glared menacingly at him and ordered him to remove his hand from his shoulder. Now, the young man took out the order of his appointment as subconsul and presented it to the employees, and they were shocked to realize who was standing right in front of them. Visibly nervous, the workers said they had not expected the subconsul to arrive so early, to which Vire immediately ordered them to prepare drinks and invite guests. Leaving the young man and heading into the building, the young man said it was time to throw a grand party to celebrate his arrival in town. The workers were bewildered, for they were very surprised at the first order of the new subconsul and were amazed at his folly. Soon, however, the order was obeyed, and all the tables were occupied with aromatic drinks and various delicious treats. The entire courtyard was filled with important, honored, and wealthy guests who were making small talk and enjoying the feast. At the same time, the underdog town clerk, Chihuahua Baskerville, was extremely puzzled by what was happening while he was watching through his office window. Looking out the window, the man thought that a flighty and daring young man had arrived at their post and had immediately thrown an alcoholic party here on the first day. Remembering that all of his predecessors had been fired for bribes, Chihuahua considered this party thrown in a sacred workplace an inappropriate event. The secretary shouted, calling Vire a petty fool and saying that at this rate he could destroy the place. It was at this point that Vire crept up to the man from behind and asked if the man was the local secretary, which startled Chihuahua, and he froze in place, not realizing when the young man had time to enter. The secretary immediately turned to the young man, realizing he had heard everything, but Vire simply introduced himself, and the man gave his name in response. The boy inquired about the name of the secretary, asking if he had a second name because that could mean that the man was from another family. In other words, that Chihuahua was not a blood relative but a common laborer who faced discrimination in the lineage and put up with it. Realizing this, Vire put his hand on Chihuahua's shoulder and said that the situation was working out just fine. Leaving the man perplexed, Chihuahua replied that he had been born here and was therefore familiar with the situation. It was labeled as local people being hardworking, so he was not going to make changes to the existing structure by lending his support. Hearing the words of the boy, Chihuahua did not believe in the good intentions of the one who was still dissatisfied with the banquet and thought that this was a new way of intimidation. Looking at the focused young man who was familiarizing himself with the documents of the city of Underdog, the man could not understand why he had come here with the party. After reviewing the records, Fakir said that there are many flaws in the judicial system, which surprised the secretary because he, at his young age, understood such issues. Young said the problem with this city has been the growth of illegal businesses, which in turn leads to the black market's supremacy over the law. Looking at the secretary, the young man said that this problem would not be solved only by shutting down illegal enterprises and that it was necessary to eliminate the main persons of the black market. Vire said he knows what the subcouncil's responsibilities are and he respects the existing legislation but will still introduce new legislation. Shua asked what this was about. The young man said he would eradicate the black market in a week, but for the law to take effect, he needed a reason for it. The secretary asked why he needed a reason for it. Vire said that he is young and also a newcomer who will only start his duties tomorrow, so he needs an introduction to make it more convincing. Then, looking out the window at the wealthy guests, the boy said an interesting phrase about spreading dung everywhere to catch dung flies. Looking at the young man carefully, Secretary Chihuahua could not understand what the new subcouncil was thinking about, and what he would have to endure during his reign. Soon the next day came, and a huge number of people gathered in the main street of Dortsmile in the town of Underdog. The new subcouncil, in the person of Vire van Baskerville, was introduced to the people and took up his duties as of today. Secretary Chihuahua's subjects asked why the subcouncil had been standing there since dawn. The man stood silent, not knowing what to say. Looking at the citizens of Underdog, Vire turned to them and greeted them, saying that he was the new subcouncil of the city. Looking at Vire, all the residents discussed that he was a young and cute boy who was probably not capable of solving the city's problems. Then the young man said that despite the change of subcouncil, the existing rules within the Baskerville family remain as strict and everything remains the same. The residents laughed, saying that the people sitting at the top were doing it themselves and soon the new subcouncil himself would be in the lobby of influential officials. At that moment, the secretary shouted, saying that those disrespecting such an important man of the Baskerville family might lose their heads. Looking at the young man, the residents kept saying that he would not be able to enforce the law and it would be better if Secretary Chihuahua became the sub-council. After hearing the complaints of the townspeople, Vire immediately took out a long stick and raised it in public to draw attention to it. Looking at it with bewilderment, the inhabitants held their breath because they did not understand where the incomprehensible actions of the new sub-council were leading to. In the next moment, the young man had already heaved this stick into the ground with lightning speed and agility, causing everyone to be shocked. All the inhabitants were very much surprised at the unexpected act of the new sub-council and amazed at such speed and power. Watching what happened, Secretary Chihuahua and his charges also did not escape this fate of surprise and opened their mouths at what they saw. Releasing the stick left in the ground, Vire said that in accordance with his powers as sub-council, he would promulgate a new special law. With a serious look at everyone, Vire said that the first clause of the law states a reward of 100 million gold to whoever can pull the stick out of the ground. Hearing Vire's words, Secretary Chihuahua and his charges could not believe their ears, for they did not understand what he was up to. The people of the city were also shocked by the first paragraph of the law announced by the sub-council and did not understand what the young man wanted to achieve in this way. Residents began to discuss animatedly that such a huge amount of money is the salary of a simple man for 4 years and most likely it is some kind of fraud. With a cold and serious look at the people of Underdog, Vire asked them if they didn't want to get 100 million just by pulling a stick out of the ground. Realizing that none of the people agreed to get the stick and feared him, the young man decided to make adjustments to the new law to get those interested. Now the sub-council announced that he would pay 1 billion gold coins to whoever pulled out the stick and asked which of the inhabitants would be willing to try their hand at it. This time, people became indignant, thinking that it was a silly prank and absurd because it can't be that the nobility was giving away such big money to ordinary people. Looking at the young sub-council with distrust, the residents told him to stop this circus because $1 billion is a huge sum not available to mere mortals. Listening to the complaints and grievances of the residents, Secretary Chihuahua bowed his head in shame and embarrassment at the young sub-council's behavior. Realizing that once again people would not agree to such terms, Vire decided to make one more amendment to his new law. Not about to give up, the young man said he would give 10 billion gold coins to the person who could pull the stick out of the ground. Not understanding what was going on and what the young sub-council was doing, the people were once again shocked by the young man's insistence. However, after the third insistence, people hesitated and were already beginning to consider trying to get that stick. But seeing the sword behind the sub-council's back, the people hesitated again because they thought that in case of failure, this small rich man could arrange an execution for them. Nevertheless, the villagers continued to discuss how deep the stick might be in the ground and how to pull it out, suspecting that the sub-council was obviously up to something bad. Vire again appealed to the residents, asking if there were any takers for such a sum, intending to raise it again, but Secretary Chihuahua said there was not much money in the treasury. Suddenly, for everyone, the voice of a little blonde girl with a basket of flowers came out of the crowd and agreed to try to get that stick out of the ground. One of the inhabitants started to stop the girl, Judy, saying that she might lose her head, to which she replied that her mother was sick and it was worth trying to get money for her. Laughing, the girl Judy asked an acquaintance to take care of her sick mom if she was doomed to such an outcome. As she approached the sub-council, the girl thought that if things didn't work out, it would be nice to get a few coins for being the laughing stock of the town. Looking sternly and coldly at the girl, Judy, the young sub-council Vire ordered her to pull out the stick since she had already volunteered to try it. Gathering her courage, Judy crouched down and gripped the stick tightly with both hands. With all her strength, the girl was suddenly able to pull the stick out of the ground. The residents were shocked that the small and weak Judy managed to do this and in fact, the stick was not stuck too deep into the ground. Surprised that the stick came out of the ground so easily, the girl looked fearfully at sub-council Vire, expecting to be punished for what she had done. With a sinister and unapproachable look, the young sub-council pulled back his cloak and pointed his hand toward the sword behind his back. Thinking that her life was about to end because of her greed and disrespect for the nobility, Judy closed her eyes and begged her mother's forgiveness for leaving her. But her suspicions turned out to be false, and suddenly Vire took out a bag of gold and brought it to the girl, telling Judy to take the 100 million he was giving her. At first, she could not believe that she had not been punished and had been rewarded by the young sub-council who had kept his promise. Asking Judy where she lived, Vire said he would provide her with a guard to help her keep and deliver the 10 billion safely to her home so that no one would rob her on the way. Then, stroking the little girl's head and praising her for her courage and bravery, the young sub-council said that these were the new laws and he pledged to keep his word to the people of Underdog. Because of this introduction, the Vire's law became more popular with the constitution. For now, breaking the law was punishable and compliance was rewarded. This simple logic touched the hearts of all citizens, and all citizens were now sure that the new sub-council kept his word and was different from all other corrupt and insolent rulers. After the introduction of Veyer's special law, illegal activity decreased markedly and the crime rate in the city was cut in half. Meanwhile, a plaque was hung on the wall in the sub-council's office, and the inscription on it said that the promise must be kept without deceit. After looking at the plaque, Weyer told the secretary that he had beautiful handwriting. After finishing his work, Chihuahua exhaled heavily and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Then, looking at the young man, the man said that he did not expect to see such an unconventional performance because for all 20 years of his service, this had never happened. Weyer replied that it was done to attract the attention of the people and to make a strong impression on them, for one cannot anger the inhabitants for distrust and ignorance of the laws. Letting out a tear, Secretary Chihuahua said that all his hard work prior to Weyer's arrival had not been in vain, and he was ready to serve the young sub-council for the rest of his days. The young man thought that he had picked up this method from Camus Morgue from the distant future when she took over as head of the family, reducing the level of offending to almost zero. Shrugging off the memories and unfolding the map, Weyer said that it was now urgent to make up for the loss of the prize money they had given to the winning girl. Marking some areas with a cross, the young man said that these places hide illegal organizations, with the help of which they will return money from the black market. Looking at the map, Secretary Chihuahua was very surprised and asked Weyer how he knew that the organizations were in the specified locations. Remembering that in his past life he had patrolled in that area all the time, the boy pointed to his nose and replied that he had smelled them. Looking at the boy with astonishment, Chihuahua thought that he was an amazing and unusual person and wondered how far he could sniff out. At that moment, one of the estate workers burst into the office and said that the sub-council had received a request for an interview from the Youth Self-Governance Committee from the mayor's office. The secretary was not happy about the news, but Weyer wanted to see what kind of pathetic local aristocrats would conduct this interview with him. The secretary replied that the self-proclaimed committee was, in fact, a sect and had been established by the second and third generations of 7 families of the Baskerville family. The boy realized that the committee wanted to comment on his new special law because it was obvious that they didn't like it. Looking at the secretary and the worker, the young sub-council said that the nasty dung flies had finally smelled the dung and surprised them, exuding an ominous aura. Weyer said that it was time to begin eradicating the lowly pests that were destroying this city. In the city of Underdog, there was a prominent club called Burning Suspense, located in a luxurious and expensive hotel. The VIP room, located at the very back of this club, was the venue for parties costing 10 million gold coins for 6 hours. There were 7 core committee members who had no shame in wasting a lot of money on building tall towers of liquor glasses just for fun and entertainment. These men were the second and third generations of 7 families from the Baskerville family, and these young rich men spent millions of gold for a single bottle of champagne and denied themselves nothing. After pouring the drink on the table, the head guy from the committee ordered his minions to lick up the spill, and they crouched down in front of him and thanked him, saying they could get drunk on it. Sitting down on the sofa, the head of the committee said that his financial outlay did not matter, for the money did not run out, to which his friend replied that it was thanks to the Baskerville. Then he said that the slave trade was thriving and the kidnapping of barbarians was going well, and it was all due to the Baskervilles' fixation on expanding their borders. The young men were glad that they remained unnoticed by the imperial family and were under the protection of the very Baskerville that provided security. The head of the committee said that this was because the Baskerville family was made up of idiots who could wield a sword and that the Meza-Madaro family was proof of that. Meza-Madaro was the most loyal of all the families but was completely destroyed by the hands of the Baskerville, who were unaware of the setup by the committee. This loyal Baskerville family did not like the entertainment of the committee, so they were framed and ruthlessly exterminated, leaving only 7 families in the lineage. Then the guys started talking about the new sub-council, saying they'd heard about his illegitimate second-class background and that they'd sent him an application for an interview. The head of the committee said that the sub-council's name was Weyer, and he was only 15 years old, so he also threw an alcoholic party on the first day he joined the mayor's office, saying that the sub-council was obviously a fool. The head of the committee offered to play with the young man by inviting him to a big party, then they would make Weyer, who had no money and who couldn't go to his family because of fear, pay for the drinks, and at the end, they would say that it was a joke. The head of the committee thought that after such pressure and fright, the boy would not even dare to look in the direction of the committee, let alone make a complaint. Suddenly, the doors of the room opened and a butler entered the room, announcing that beautiful girls had arrived to treat the guys. At the same moment, another man entered the room, and one of the committee members looked in surprise at the stranger who had come in. The boy asked if anyone knew who had invited the young waiter, to which the butler replied that he thought he had been invited by someone on the committee. Grabbing the young man by the hair, the butler said that he had walked in here so calmly that he hadn't even aroused any suspicion, and then asked who the young man was. Vire clearly didn't like this attitude from the butler, and his eyes filled with anger and rage. Then something happened that suddenly shocked all the members of the committee, and the invited girls sitting next to them. Before the butler had time to remember and realize how it happened, he saw his mangled hand by this young man in a matter of seconds. Supporting his arm, the man cried out in great pain, and the committee members meanwhile looked at the unfamiliar young man in horror and asked what he was doing. With a disdainful look at the committee members, the young man introduced himself by saying his name was Vire van Baskerville. Frightened by his sudden appearance, the participants asked why the sub-council had visited them, to which Vire replied that they had invited him themselves. Nervously laughing, the head of the committee said that he had not expected such a short visit from the young man, so he could not prepare for his arrival. Then the guy whispered to his friend, saying it was time to tame the newcomer by first sitting him down at the table, and then making him pay for all the expense of alcohol. Hearing their vile conversation, Vire banged his hand with all his might on the table and told the boys to stop whispering in front of him. Everyone present was surprised and frozen in place, not expecting such an act from the young man. In the next second, the huge tower of glasses with expensive alcohol shook and began to collapse. The spray from the drinks flew on all the committee members and the girls sitting next to them like rain. The head of the committee couldn't believe that the young sub-council had blasted the champagne tower with a mana resonance with only one minor blow to the table. Glancing at the embittered sub-council standing across from him, the guy suggested that Vire might have immense power and be an alumnus. The guys began to argue among themselves about who was the strongest, and who should go against the sub-council because he was very strong. At this point, Vire walked up to one of the contestants and, putting his hand on the guy's shoulder, really scared him. A rather nervous committee member said they would pay for all the booze that had been spilled by the sub-council earlier. Vire replied that of course they would pay for the drinks themselves because they were unlikely to extort money from him. But the guy replied that they had just misspoken and he had misunderstood them. All the members of the committee began to say that they would not have done such a ruthless thing to a man of the Baskerville family, and had simply decided to test the young man's mettle as a sub-council. The head said that in this way they checked the young man for temptations, for now the city had fallen into sins, and the other fellow said that they would follow Vire. However, after listening to the guy's words, Vire suddenly hit one of the guys, telling them one important truth. He held ruthlessly, holding the lad by his flesh. The young sub-council said that a master could test his dog all he wanted, but not the other way around. The boy immediately howled in sharp pain, and the young sub-council told him not to think he could fear nothing with only money in his pocket and a little power. Tossing the guy to the floor, Vire said that he had obviously never faced real fear. Putting his foot on the guy's face and looking back at the others, the young man asked if they understood why he had done this to their friend. Without hearing a reply, Vire said that the same thing would happen to the others. Being very frightened, the other guys started to say that they knew what was wrong. Realizing that the boys still didn't understand the true reason for his actions, the young sub-council ordered him to behave and crushed their friend's head with his foot. Seeing the sub-council eliminate their friend, all the guys stood up abruptly from their seats and shouted, calling him a fool and claiming that he couldn't get away with it. Sneaking up on one of the guys, the young man smiled evilly and said that they obviously never made the right conclusions from their nefarious deeds. The sub-council said that he realized that all this time the boys had been fearlessly engaged in kidnapping, illegal slave trade, and insulting Baskerville. After eliminating this guy as well, Vire said that there was obviously no way to tame these animals in the room without flogging them. A little later, the young sub-council found himself in a creepy dungeon where there were cells for the criminals of this city. Standing behind Vire's back, Secretary Chihuahua was very surprised at the sight before him, for he had never been here before. At that moment, a man shouted from the cell and said that Vire would not get away with it, and would be punished by his father. Man turned out to be the head of the committee who threatened the young sub-consul with violent reprisals as soon as he approached him. Seeing the ghastly condition of the boys, the secretary asked Vire why he had beaten and maimed the committee members so badly. The young man asked if he was overdoing it, to which Chihuahua replied that the boy was definitely overdoing it because you can't turn people into chops. After listening to the man, Vire told him not to worry about it because he hadn't even started yet, and the secretary asked what the boy meant. The sub-consul went to the cell and said that the mayor's office had always kept this sect under control, but now everything had changed because they were trying to take over the Baskerville. Looking at the head of the committee through the bars, Vire said that the lack of education was evident even in the insolent faces of these guys. Being serious, the young man said that one day everyone would be punished, and since he had taken up the case, he would eliminate everyone involved. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the committee members cried and began to beg for forgiveness, saying that they were wrong in their actions and asking for mercy. For the last time, looking at the heads of the committee members, Secretary Chihuahua said it's unlikely the boys' families will sit idly by after learning what happened to them. Insistently addressing the young man, Chihuahua was sure that in the future the boys would not support the projects of the subconsul, and would most likely take revenge on him at any cost. However, Vire said that everything would work out and advised the man not to worry about protesting families because they too are involved in crimes. Looking at the confused secretary, the young subconsul said that if evidence of the family's crimes was needed, he would deliberately create it if it could not be found. Vire knew that soon there would be a global upheaval in the world in which there was a high probability of his participation in the battle, and if that didn't happen, he would enter the academy and leave here. Turning to the guys, the young man remembered all their sins, namely kidnapping and trafficking in women, bribery, blackmail, tax extortion, and elimination of people. The head of the committee replied that they had not done it, and if the subconsul was provided with evidence of their offenses, they would definitely be punished. Smiling evilly, Vire said that the guy was deluded if he thought there was no evidence in the presence of such serious crimes. Desperate, the head of the committee wanted to say something but quickly stopped and did not utter a word because he realized that he had nothing to oppose. Watching him, Vire realized that he was ready to sacrifice his life but would never betray his family. At that moment, a man appeared behind him and addressed the young man. The young subconsul rejoiced at the man's arrival, saying that he had finally arrived, but Secretary Chihuahua was clearly surprised at the appearance of this suspicious man holding a large sack with incomprehensible contents. The mysterious man said that the subconsul's customized order had been fulfilled. When he took out the contents of the bag, Vire saw a lot of gruesome and bloody tools, including saws, knives, picks, and other sharp objects. Turning to the subconsul, the executioner said that in all his 30 years of torture, this was the first time he had seen so many gruesome tools, and Vire replied that these things were not uncommon in the place where he lived. Then the executioner asked the young man if he had lived in hell, and Vire replied that this place was like hell and he could teach the executioner how to use these objects, but he politely refused. Looking at the assortment of tools, the young man thought that he had missed such tools in his past life in the age of destruction for torturing demons. Taking off his jacket, Vire said that the torture could begin, and then the head of the committee was finally convinced that the subconsul would not just let them go. Looking into the eyes of the guys full of fear, the boy asked where they lost all their confidence and stubbornness they showed earlier. Rolling up his shirt sleeves, Vire ordered the boys to be silent, for he wanted to savor the old sensations of torture and proceeded to the gruesome procedures. Soon, rumors of what happened in the committee room quickly spread through the city, and the gang of 7 corrupt and violent idiots were promptly arrested. Everyone was discussing this incident, and given the character of the new subconsul, the residents were sure that the rich offspring were unlikely to be released and would definitely bring shame to their families. Many residents argued that these guys should only get the death penalty after all the atrocities they had committed, but they weren't sure that's what would happen. Some argued that the subconsul would not forgive this and would execute everyone. Others feared that the consequences of executing the heirs could be far from humorous. However, all the townspeople agreed that this incident was a power play between the new politician and the local rich, and if they bowed their heads once, it would all be over. As the townspeople had anticipated, soon after, Mang Blang, Fari, Lobi, Chanel, Fagu, Eros, and Fra offered their sincere apologies to the new subconsul. Local officials also bowed to subconsul Vire, offering him compensation for the harm he had caused. Everyone was sure that thus the 7 heirs were released safely after listening to their fathers screaming at home. However, the townspeople thought so at first until they saw the 7 heads of the heirs of these families in the middle of the central square of Underdog City. All the heads were soaked in cinnamon and had contorted facial expressions showing the horrible hellish pain they felt until their last breath. A warning hanging over their heads detailed all the kinds of tortures performed on them, which shocked all the inhabitants with their sophistication. After finishing the case, Vire said that this law had always existed, so there was nothing surprising in such a massacre of disorderly people. However, the very fact of punishing known aristocrats would cause changes, and upon hearing the declaration of war, the remaining aristocrats would spring into action. The secretary was not prepared to hear that if a confrontation between politicians and aristocrats began, a bloody wind would blow on Underdog in the future. Vire turned and looked at Chihuahua and said that he should be worried because he would be taking part in his next covert operation soon. That very moment came, and putting a mask over his face, the secretary whispered, asking Vire if they were really on a covert operation now. Then the young subconsul, also undercover, asked Chihuahua if he didn't trust him, and the man said that wasn't the point. The man looked at the boy with a frightened look and doubted the rightness of such an action because their task was very dangerous, and he was worried about him. Secretary Chihuahua was worried about the young sub-consul being put in an iron cage like some wild animal. Soon, the boy was taken to a place run by fallen and vile aristocrats who brought slaves and kidnapped people to sell. The worst part was that Mr. Vire himself had set himself up to be sold as a slave to one of the aristocrats. Somewhere on the outskirts of the city of Underdog, there was a huge circle tent hidden from the eyes of ordinary people, near which luxurious carriages began to gather. Today was the opening day of the slave trade, which of course the Baskerville had not been told about, and the local commodity was kidnapped barbarian nobles and commoners. In the tent, the guests of honor were greeted by a man dressed in a clown costume who solemnly welcomed everyone to a place called the circus. When he approached the clown, Chihuahua gave him his ticket on which the purpose of the visit was indicated, and from his handwriting, the clown determined that the man was from the Mang Blang family. A slightly nervous Chihuahua confirmed what was written, saying that he had come to sell the slave who was behind his back. The clown was concerned because people from this family bought slaves in bulk, thinking that someone was not to their liking, to which Chihuahua replied that he was always satisfied with the goods bought here. Upon seeing the male slave, the clown said that such a rare and unusual specimen with black hair and red eyes he would be able to sell at a great price. Accepting this bid, the clown invited Mr. Chihuahua Mang Blang to come inside and wished him a fun time at the circus watching the auction. Soon, the whole hall was filled with aristocrats, and positioned in the center of the stage, the clown leading the event began his performance, addressing the audience. At that moment, the guests were discussing who liked which slaves because some wanted a slave with a tragic fate, some wanted a beautiful slave, and some liked kidnapped people. In a loud stage voice, the clown announced that this auction featured an unusual item that had been secretly stolen from the hunters of the Baskerville family. This item turned out to be a huge hell bison nicknamed Murcielago, who had 19 hearts and was a top-level monster. In this monster were valuable skin, flesh, bones, and organs, all of which had a high value, and the starting price of the auction was the sum of 100 million gold. Interested guests began to make bets, breaking each more and more sum because many wanted to possess such a precious commodity. Upon hearing the largest unbeatable sum of 250 million gold, the clown struck his hammer and announced that the lot had been sold to the man in question. Then came the next slaves for whom the nefarious aristocrats were vying, throwing their money in all directions and making bets, trying to snatch their prey. Suddenly, a man came up to the clown asking to sell another lot, and upon learning what the item was, the clown was surprised and said that he did not give guarantees but would try to interest buyers. Turning to the guests, the clown began to tell about this special and rare commodity which was brought by slave traders from the depths of the wild jungle. This commodity turned out to be a young barbarian girl who came from a fearsome and strong fighting tribe from the jungles of the Red-Black Mountain called the Balik. The girl glared angrily and hatefully at all these vile people while the clown offered to ransom and test his taming skills on this fierce slave. Hearing the incomprehensible language and screams of the savage, the guests could not understand why to sell such goods, but the clown still risked to start the auction with the sum of 5 million. However, none of the guests were willing to bid in favor of this lot, and realizing this difficult situation, the host offered a lower bid of 3 million. Once again not seeing the interest of the guests, the clown said that he would give them 1 million if they would make at least a minimum bid for this girl, but the audience did not give in even to such a provocation and began to get bored and show their indignation at the lack of interesting merchandise. Realizing that the lot was not to sell, the clown told his huge assistant to get rid of the girl Varvara and to deliver to the stage only verified goods. At this point, the girl became enraged and began to shout something in her own language and tried to get out of the shackles that were restraining her body, but the huge executioner and the clown's assistant quickly pacified the slave with a powerful blow, after which she instantly lost consciousness. While the executioner was carrying the girl away on his back, the clown apologized for the misunderstanding to the audience and said it was time for the next item. Then the auction with the best items began, and to the guests brought out a young Vire, who passed by the executioner and the girl Varvara. One of the aristocratic ladies present immediately caught sight of the merchandise that had just been delivered to the stage and was struck by the fact that in front of the nefarious rich men appeared a young handsome young man with beautiful long black hair, an athletic build, and bright red eyes. The clown immediately approached the young man and began to tell him about the item, saying that it was very rare and initially docile, so it would not require much training. Without listening to the clown, the lady who liked Vire immediately made a bet of 600 million, which the clown was very happy about because not having had time to specify the starting amount had already heard the bet. Suddenly, another guest announced a bid of 800 million, and the angry lady yelled at the one because she did not understand why such a handsome young man needed a man, while the man replied that he needed the young man as a gladiator and clarified relations with the aristocrat. Another guest outbid him by offering 900 million. Suddenly, one of the guests picked up the plate with his number and said that he was offering 6 billion for this slave. The clown looked at him for a moment and froze because he did not expect to hear such a huge sum for this young slave. Catching a wave of excitement, the clown began to ask who could offer more, but all the guests were silent. Turning around and looking at the man who made the last bet, the aristocrats immediately recognized that this man was Baron Gambino of Zitanit, with his young assistant standing behind him. There were rumors among the nobles that the vile man had recently risen by absorbing underground funds. Looking at the Baron's aide, he asked if he had made too big a bet, to which Gambino replied that he would resell the young man in the capital at twice the price. Doubting the correctness of the Baron's actions, the girl said that it was too large a sum and that he would be suitable for sale as he matured. Gambino ordered Cindy to shut up, for he had taken the girl and when she had no place to go, so she must not look down on her master. In the end, no one offered a higher amount, and the clown said that the customer number 99, Baron Gambino, gets the right to own this unique product. When Vire was brought to the Baron, the man saw that the young man looked even better up close and said that he had prepared a couple of games for them to try out his goods. After these words, the young subconsul raised his hands to the man's face, and Gambino was surprised and asked the young man if he wanted the shackles removed. Replying to the Baron that there was no need, Vire broke the strong chains with his hands in a second and said he would gladly play with the man. Seeing this, Cindy, standing behind Baron Gambino, was frightened and surprised at such strength of such a young boy. Without hesitation, Vire struck Baron Gambino with a powerful blow, and he flew backward, blowing everything around him to smithereens. Landing on the floor, the man coughed and heard a question from a boy who asked if the Baron liked this game called Spear and Shield. Approaching Gambino and clutching tightly at his flesh, the young subconsul said that in this game he would be the spear and the man the shield, and if the latter held out, he would win. Tears sprang from the Baron's eyes from the infernal pain, and he screamed frantically, begging his assistant Cindy to call the guards, but she froze in place in fear. Before she could even move from her seat, the girl saw the man fall silent in an instant, and his eyes ceased to emit life energy. Then the young man slowly took off his wig and exposed his real face, and then Cindy immediately realized that subconsul Vire van Baskerville stood before her. All the guests of the circus were horrified to realize that the subconsul himself had come here under the guise of a slave, and the secretary realized that the young man would again punish everyone with extreme cruelty. After looking at these vile aristocrats, Vire said that this place was aptly named circus since it housed so many clowns. Anticipating a taste of further revenge, the young subconsul said that all present were unlikely to return home unharmed. Realizing that their secret society was caught off guard, the clown organizer decided to act quickly and decisively because he did not care that the young man turned out to be a subconsul. Pointing his finger at Vire, the clown said it didn't matter who the boy was and ordered his minions to eliminate him because he was completely unarmed. Immediately following the organizer's order, the armed fighters rushed to attack the young man to eliminate him as soon as possible. However, at that moment, Vire summoned and released the demonic sword bug from his hand, showing that he was not unarmed. Ahead of his opponents, the young subconsul eliminated all three men in a flash, stripping them of their heads with a single blow. Upon seeing what had happened, the clown noticed the red viscous aura exuding from the young subconsul and suspected something was wrong. Immediately after the fallen trio, the executioner entered the fray, spinning his metal sphere on a chain, but Vire didn't keep the man waiting long. Rushing towards him, sneaking up to the metal sphere, the young man immediately channeled his power to disarm this formidable big guy. In the next instant, Vire shattered the metal sphere and eliminated the creepy executioner, thus letting everyone know that he was a graduate level to be an alumnist at such an age. Even as Baskerville was quite unusual, for alumni are the best weapons representing the strength of a country. Realizing that with such an opponent, victory was not seen, the clown decided to act with more vile methods, using for this the next standing chihuahua, who supported the young man. Laughing evilly, the clown turned his attention to himself and ordered Vire to look away from the fight and look in his direction. The young man turned around and saw his secretary being held hostage by the clown, who ordered him to surrender or his employee would be in trouble. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Vire stopped fighting at that second and hid his demonic sword back in his hand. Being extremely frightened, the secretary approached the young subconsul, saying he was fine and asked that the young man be careful. The clown ordered him to shut up because he was at a disadvantage, and the man replied that he would rather suffer than frame his boss. Hearing Chihuahua's words, Vire laughed out loud and said he knew of his loyal secretary's boundless loyalty. Then the young subconsul said that in leaving the Baskerville mansion, He had received a hidden card in the form of a whistle from the head of Hugo, which was now fastened to his leg. The secretary immediately recognized this whistle and understood everything, but the clown didn't know what the object was and anxiously asked what the young man was going to do with it. Bringing the whistle to his face, Vire blew it with all his might, and a loud shrill sound spread throughout the tent. Not expecting such a strong and nasty sound from a small whistle, all the aristocrats instantly covered their ears to avoid hearing it. The clown and Chihuahua continued to stare at the young man and stood motionless, waiting for what would follow. After the piercing whistle, having finished blowing the whistle, the young subconsul took it away from his face and froze in anticipation of further actions that were bound to take place. Not noticing any immediate change, the clown haughtily told Vire that this dude could only frighten others with its ugly sound. Before he could finish his speech about how the guy had failed to do anything despite the fact that he was a graduate, the clown was silent because a sharp sword blade pierced his throat. In the same second, the clown fell breathlessly to the floor at the hands of a mysterious cloaked man standing behind him. Secretary Chihuahua cried out in surprise that his assailant, who had just threatened his life, was no longer breathing and that the mysterious man had hidden his sword. Suddenly, one of the clown's henchmen and his accomplice rushed to attack the cloaked man to avenge their fallen superior. However, the stranger did not even budge and riddled the body of the male assailant with little effort. All the rest of the clown's accomplices froze in fear, not expecting to see such a gruesome massacre of their friend and worrying for their lives. The same moment, a huge number of warriors dressed in the same cloaks as the man who had eliminated the clown hurriedly entered the tent. The swordsmen spread out all around and surrounded all the nefarious aristocrats in this circus. The clown's accomplices began to suspect who all these swordsmen might be, and if it turned out to be true, they would not be spared. Recognizing the sign in the shape of fangs, Cindy realized that this was the most ferocious unit in the entire empire, consisting of a large number of knights. The swordsman who had suddenly crept up behind her was just one of the members of the Baskerville KN squad called Pitbull. Turning around and looking at the man in horror, Cindy couldn't believe she was going to the other side of the world in such a creepy place. But at that moment, Vire blocked the knight's path and covered the girl with himself, ordering him to let her live but detain her. In the same second, the man drew back from Vire and knelt before the young SUBC consul, showing his submission and reverence. Vire then gave orders to eliminate all other guests but not to touch those lying still, but not to spare those at the slightest movement of the body. Remembering Hugo's words, the young man thought that he had paid great attention to military power, and was glad that he had gotten a Pitbull squad for his request. A squad of knights immediately began to eliminate the vile and corrupt aristocrats on Vire's orders, and one of the guests fell to the floor and decided to wait it out and then escape. But suddenly, one of the swordsmen noticed him and immediately approached, looking at him with an intimidating, piercing gaze. Hoping for mercy from the knight, the aristocrat held out his hands to the knight and asked him to cuff him. However, the swordsman replied that they did not carry handcuffs and immediately attacked the man, stripping him of both legs so that he could not escape. Soon, a huge man with a cigar in his teeth came up to Vire and asked him if he liked his pit bulls, to which the young man replied that he was very pleased with the swordsman. The man said that he could always ask for help because he was VK's uncle and the captain of the night squad, and his name was Boston Terrier. Boston Terrier realized why his brother Hugo was so interested in the young man, for Vire, at his 15 years, was very clever and very violent in his actions. Putting his hand on his nephew's head, the man suggested that he join the Pitbulls, but the young SUBC consul was slow to respond and said he would think about it. Before he knew it, Boston Terrier saw the boy who said he had urgent business to attend to and had to go. After realizing that the young man had the guts to ignore his uncle, the man realized that he really wanted to get Vire into his Pitbull collection. After escaping from his annoying uncle, the young man went into a room where there were many cages in which slaves were kept until they were sold. Soon, Vire saw a huge safe with noblemen's money that he was going to return to the mayor's office for tax security, reasoning that he didn't feel like contributing to the Baskervilles' property. The young man noticed a cage that was covered with a thick cloth. Realizing that he had come to the warehouse for another reason, the boy was still overcome with interest and removed the cloth from the cage to see what was there. In the cage lay a barbarian girl who had never been able to sell at auction and who was covered in scars and was in a semi-conscious, exhausted state. Looking at the victim of the vile merchants, Vire realized that the girl had been badly beaten and was not in the best condition. Taking out a vial of red liquid from his belt, the young man said that the girl was very lucky because he would give her a restorative potion. The young SUBC consul opened the vessel and began to pour the potion into the girl's mouth so that she could drink a little to heal and regain consciousness. Soon, the girl's body was saturated with the potion and began to radiate life energy, which was a good sign. Suddenly opening her eyes, the girl didn't realize what had happened because her last memory was of standing at an auction in front of aristocrats. When she saw the young man in front of her, she recoiled, fearing for the safety of her life. Not expecting such a reaction from the girl, Vire asked her what she was so afraid of. After opening the cage, Vire stepped aside and turned to the stranger, speaking a phrase in the barbarian language, telling her to get out of here as soon as possible. The girl looked at the young man with apprehension and misunderstanding, for it was surprising that a man not of their kind knew the language of the barbarians, and opened the way for her. Remembering that he had learned the language of the barbarians at a basic level while fighting those in his past life, Vire once again ordered the girl to get out of here. Unexpectedly, the girl looked him in the eyes with confidence and began to tell him something in her own language, but he replied that he did not know their language at that level. Then, leaving the cage, the girl headed for the exit while continuing to look with interest at her savior. Then she paused for a moment and uttered one last phrase in her own language, obviously not quite understanding the meaning of these words. Vire looked after the stranger and said that he would consider her words as gratitude. Finally left alone in this room, Vire continued his search, and finding what he had come for, he removed the cloth from this important commodity. Beneath the cloth was the breathless body of Murcielago, who for the boy's benefit had not yet been butchered and thus could take whatever he needed. Releasing Beelzebub from his hand, the young man said that it had been a long time since they had had a top-level monster, and that it was time to start eating and savoring the monster's blood. Soon everyone was talking about the young SUBC consul who instantly crushed criminal organizations whose members were stripped of their limbs and taken to prisons. Also, on that day, the burning mansion that housed the huge devil's lair of the fallen aristocrats of Underdog City was burned to the ground. The heads of all the VIP visitors to this creepy lair were put on display in the town square, and people became more vigilant about criminal activity. At the same time, 7 families who had previously lost their heirs wrote complaints to the government, whose response was categorical. As the head of the city's government, Vire replied to the 7 families that the only consequence for all criminals involved in the slave trade would be execution. The families' protests stopped when all their accounts came to light, which were handed over for investigation to the Baskerville, who had implicated the imperial family in the affair. As a result, the heads of the families personally went to the government, where they had to beg for forgiveness from the man who had previously eliminated all their sons. Looking at the heads of the 7 families, Vire said that all the black ledgers from the burning mansion had already been searched thoroughly. On this basis, all 7 families, without exception, would be subject to requisition of property under the constitution of the Baskerville Dominion. At last, the young SUBC consul looked angrily at the heads of families and said that the 3 families who had committed treason against the Baskerville were sentenced to execution. Since these harsh reforms, the city of Underdog has bathed in the blood of traitors and has come to a prosperous place where Vire's good reputation among the citizens has grown day by day. On one such workday, the young SUBC consul's secretary, Chihuahua, entered the young man's office and suggested that he take a break and have a cup of coffee. Vire replied that it was not necessary to do so, but the secretary said that he expressed his personal gratitude because he had saved him on the day of the covert operation. The young man jokingly said that coffee was too small a price to pay for salvation. He smiled and replied that he had added 2 spoonfuls of cream and 2 lumps of sugar. The secretary then asked how the young man's manuscript training was going, and Vire asked to see it. Chihuahua looked at the young man's manuscript and said that despite his recent start in training, he was making great progress and writing beautifully. Then the secretary thought that the young man was an incredible person because only after learning the letters had he already managed to write new laws with excellent legal knowledge. Looking at Vire, Secretary Chihuahua concluded that if the young man stayed here, the city of Underdog would become even more developed and prosperous. Finishing his workday late in the evening, the young SUBC consul decided to visit one interesting place. This place was the prison where the man Vire needed to communicate with was being held. Looking at the shackled prisoner, the young man apologized for not coming at once because he had been busy with important matters lately. This prisoner turned out to be Cindy, who had been rescued by the Cindy SUBC consul, and the girl immediately asked why he had spared her. After removing the blindfold from her eyes, Vire replied that he saved the girl because he wanted to ask her a few questions. He was concerned about her. Glaring angrily at the young man, she asked if that was really the only reason she was saved. Moving away from the girl, Vire said that thanks to that lowly Baron Gambino, he was able to increase his power in a short period of time. Taking the chair, the young man said that the girl had good earning skills and would make a fine merchant or finer if she weren't on the dark side. Sitting down in the chair in front of Cindy, the SUBC consul promised to let her go if she answered all his questions. The young man also specified that if the girl resisted cooperation, she would regret her choice very much, and Cindy decided to answer the questions. Then Vire asked how the girl thought he knew about law enforcement, and with a smirk, she replied that he had reached the level of magistrate. Hearing the falsity in the girl's words, the young man said that he would not be able to keep his promise if she continued to lie to his face. Unexpectedly, Cindy told him that she thought the SUBC consul was doing something very wrong, which made him very angry. Hearing the girl's comment, Vire instantly got up from his chair and came close to the girl, taking Cindy by the chin and directing her gaze straight to his face. The young man asked what exactly he was doing wrong. The girl looked at Vire with a confused look, thinking that he was going to hurt her, but the very next second, the young SUBC consul let go of her face without hurting her. Once again moving away from Cindy to his chair, the young man asked what was wrong with his actions. The girl replied that since long ago in government, beneficence had been a major factor in moral principle. Vire had strengthened his authority with his own methods, but if this continued, he would have to eliminate many more in the future, which would cause resentment among the people. Also, the Baskerville would not approve of the young man's influence on Underdog if it was greater than that of the head of the clan. Then the young man realized what Cindy meant. He looked at the girl with interest and asked how to proceed in order to avoid these undesirable aspects. Cindy replied confidently that it was necessary to turn over all authority to the Baskerville and return the town to its master. Afterwards, the young man would need to travel to the plains of Red Black Mountain or to the Central Academy of the Empire and develop while being as inconspicuous as possible. Vire replied that her advice sounded like she was telling a pitiful hunting dog to tear its master's throat out. Looking with complete seriousness at the young man, Cindy replied that it was the only way to avoid trouble. With a slightly disheartened look, Vire replied to the girl that he was pleased with her advice. The young man appreciated her offer of a solution to the problems, saying that their thoughts on the matter were very similar, and then pulled out the key to the shackles, saying that Cindy was now free. The young man released her from the shackles as promised earlier. The girl was surprised that the SUBC consul was actually letting her go, and Vire said he always keeps his word. Leaving the prison cell, Cindy said that Vire might regret this decision, but the young man asked if she knew the Messi Madaro family. There were actually 8 families in Underdog. The Messi Madaro family was the richest merchant family of all the others. Hearing no response from the girl, Vire said that there was an accident in this family, and Cindy froze in place. At that time, the youngest son of the head of Messi Madaro was to demonstrate his sword skills at his birthday celebration. After the demonstration began, the members of the Baskerville family present there were simply amazed at what this young man had shown them. The young man's skills were the Baskerville sword style, which was secretly learned only in their family. Upon hearing this, the Baskerville decided that there was a level 1 secret leak and unleashed hunting dogs that ruthlessly eliminated the Messi Madaro clan on the same day. But the real intruders were the heirs of 7 families who stole a book with secret knowledge and taught the son of the Messi Madaro family with it. After listening to the SUBC consul's words and making a nonchalant face, Cindy asked what the 8th family had to do with her. Vire replied that there was still one person left of the family, and that was a 1-year-old girl secretly kidnapped by these devilish heirs of the 7 families. The young man told her that because of her unprecedented beauty, this little girl had to go through cruel and shameful tortures, the details of which are even hard to pronounce. Not wanting to listen to the young SUBC consul anymore, the furious girl quickly headed for the exit to leave this creepy place as soon as possible. But Vire did not rush to stop Cindy and persisted with his speech, saying that this story has a sequel. The story continued with the arrival of a new SUBC consul who brought out all the old vices of the heirs of the 7 families and punished them severely. The new SUBC consul mercilessly tortured the heirs, forcing them to pay for every sin and then leave while begging for forgiveness for all they had done. Cindy stopped, not holding back her emotions. The girl shouted and asked who they were apologizing to, and the young man replied that Cindy obviously knew who they were apologizing to. Crying, the girl heard them apologize to the only remaining person of the family, namely the girl Cindy St. Rose. Looking at Vire, Cindy asked how she could trust the young man that he had actually tortured and made those begging for forgiveness based on words alone. Taking the torch, Vire said it was better to make sure with her own eyes by looking at the evidence, and turned the girl's gaze to one of the prisoner's cells. Looking through the bars of the cell, Cindy saw that all the walls of the cell and the floor were written in blood with pleas for forgiveness and confessions to the destruction of her kind. Also, in the cells were left rotting bodies of these heirs deprived of their heads, which threw the girl into the deepest shock. After what she had seen, Cindy fell to the floor without strength, for she felt sick and vomited from the gruesome sight. Then the young man said that these were not all the culprits she should hate, for she also had every right to hate the family of Baskerville. Looking angrily at Vire, Cindy asked why he was helping her since he was a member of the Baskerville family. Smirking, the young man replied that this family was not the only reason she was harmed, so the girl was asking stupid questions. After listening to the counsel, Cindy stood up and walked towards the exit, saying that she would not be indebted to the young man by providing him with money for whatever he did. Looking after the departing Cindy, Vire said that he had memorized the girl's words, so she would have to keep her word if necessary. Soon that day ended, and a new one began, and earlier in the morning, there was a loud knock on the door of the young man's room. Opening the door, the Chihuahua's secretary called Vire a sleeper, telling him to wake up and wishing him a good morning. But before he finished his speech, he was frightened by what he saw, for the young master was lying in his bed and the room was strewn with dead bodies and blood. Then the young man woke up and, rubbing his sleepy eyes, said hello to the secretary, to which Chihuahua immediately asked what those bodies in his room were. Vire replied that he didn't remember because he had probably eliminated those in his sleep, but the man was amazed at the boy's calm answer because it all looked very creepy. Soon they left the room, and Chihuahua's secretary asked what kind of childhood the boy had had in his parents' home, and he replied that it had been very merry. Ignoring the man's concern, Vire hesitated and said that he had been getting a lot of trouble with these attacks lately. The young man remembered that first they shot poison arrows at him, then brought poison drinks 4 times, and then doused him with sulfuric acid. So there were attempted arson and shooting, and then followed by a carriage run over and many other threats to the SUBC consul's life. After a little thought, the young man said that he was obviously attracting a lot of attention, to which Chihuahua replied that he was rather crazy if he thought it was a sign of attention. At the auction, with the help of Beelzebub, Vire obtained a very useful indestructible life skill from a hell buffalo that proved to be quite effective. Now the young man's body was strengthened by the waters of the river Styx and had the skill of indestructible life, for which there was no trace left on him during yesterday's attack. Suddenly, a fancy carriage arrived in the courtyard of the estate, surprising the young SUBC consul and Chihuahua's secretary with its arrival. On the roof of the carriage, the flags of the Baskerville family were flying in the wind, which could not be confused with any other flags in this empire. Upon seeing these identifying marks, young Vire realized that someone from the main house of Baskerville had arrived. Soon the carriage doors opened, and before them appeared an arriving man who clearly shocked Secretary Chihuahua. This man turned out to be Superintendent Barrymore, who immediately bowed and said hello to young Mr. Vire. The young man then said hello in return and said that the manager had looked better in the time they had not seen each other. During the conversation between Barrymore and Vire, they were being closely watched by Chihuahua's secretary. He looked at the manager with interest and surprise. Barrymore was a top CEO and 4th-generation manager working for the bloodthirsty Baskerville family, where you could lose your head for one mistake. Chihuahua was insanely happy and excited to see the idol of all the Baskerville laborers with his own eyes. Barrymore then told Vire that apparently the reason for his arrival could only be one thing, and the manager confirmed the young man's words. Barrymore said that Hugo, the chief, praised his son's accomplishments, and was pleased with the success of the one, and ordered him to be brought to the home. Imagining the haughty look on Hugo's face, Vire couldn't believe that he could genuinely be happy about his success. Obeying their father's orders, Vire and Barrymore soon arrived at the chapter where Hugo was at this time studying something intently in the edition of the newspaper, which wrote about the new SUBC consul of the city underdog who quickly eliminated crime and won the love of the citizens and the hatred of villains. Hugo told Vire that with such reforms, the Baskerville could rid themselves of the image of fools who only know how to wield swords. Then the head praised his son for the work he had done, and the young man bowed and called him master, replying that he was only doing his job. After Hugo said that the reward and punishment must be received without fail, the young man would enter the academy because he really deserved it. The Colosseum Academy was the best in the empire. The students here were children of nobles and royalty, and Vire was very happy to have this opportunity. The head said that he was going to send some more guys to the academy and asked the young man which of his close brothers he would like to study with, intending to take them with him to use as a punching bag. Vire replied that his closest brothers were high bro, middle bro, and low bro. The head replied that he would send his brothers with him to the academy, and then asked if he remembered the strategy developed at the age of 8. The young man replied that his plan was to lease the ruby mines to the Morgue clan to use them to eliminate the barbarians. Hugo looked at his son and said that the plan had worked and was as successful as the young man had previously thought. The young man asked what the words of the head meant, to which the man replied that the Morgue were the first to offer joint submission, which was quite malleable on the part of those. Hugo then asked Vire if he would like to take a walk around the area before he left to see if the laws were being followed. The young man obediently bowed before Hugo and said he was obeying his master's orders. Sometime later, Having finished all business in the city, Underdog Vire was leaving the estate, and Secretary Chihuahua escorted the young man on his way. With tears in his eyes, Chihuahua said goodbye to the young subconsul to whom he had time to attach all his soul. Looking after Vire, the man told him to be careful and that he would take care of the administration in the young man's absence. Looking back at Secretary Chihuahua, the young man thought that soon he would have to say goodbye to the man, and he was sad at the thought because he had also befriended him. Leaving Underdog Manor, Vire headed for the diamond mines of the Morgue family. Passing through a forest grove, suddenly the young man turned to someone and insistently told them to stop hiding behind the trees and come out to him. After Vire's words, mysterious people in dark cloaks instantly emerged from the forest and showed themselves in front of the others. Then the young man turned to the man who had approached him and said that they had done the right thing not to come out all this time because he did not want to make a fuss. The man turned out to be a Staffordshire Baskerville, who said that a loyal band of pit bulls would escort the young man safely to the Morgue fortress. Vire asked the man how Uncle Boston Terrier was doing, and the Staffordshire man replied that after the auction, the man stated that the young man should join the pit bull's squad. Remembering the behavior and character of his Uncle Boston Terrier, the young man thought that he was a very unpleasant person and he did not like to cross him. Soon, Vire and a band of pit bulls reached the lands that had been leased to the Morgue family. Looking at the hardworking people, the young man said that looking at all this, you can't say that illegal activity is going on here. Staffordshire said that supposedly this delegation was a territorial inspection, but without listening to the man, Vire replied that he knew it was a squad to subdue the barbarians. Then Staffordshire said that here were gathered 2 deputies from the Morgue family, 30 members of the House of Representatives, and about 100 wizards who were not members of the Legislative Assembly. Unlike the Morgues, Hugo brought only a member of the House of Representatives, Vire, and a dozen knights to these lands while the elite remained in ambush on the other side of the ridge. At this point, the young man thought it would be a good idea to investigate the way of life of the barbarians, as the head of the Baskervilles had advised him earlier. After a little while, they reached a castle surrounded by high walls and a deep moat, with human skeletons hanging from huge spikes. Looking at these breathless human remains, it was immediately clear that this was the work of ruthless Morgue mages. Looking at this sight, Staffordshire said it was a very cruel and forceful warning to the barbarians from the Morgue family. The whole sight reminded Vire of the ruthless and calculating Morgue, for such were the imprints of memories of that one from his past life. Suddenly, 3 female silhouettes appeared on the high wall, and one of the girls asked who the travelers in front of the castle walls were. As the 3 girls approached the edge of the wall, they said that no one could enter the castle without their permission. Looking closely at them, Vire thought they looked very familiar, but he couldn't figure out who the girls resembled. These girls were known as the 3 flowers of the Morgue family, and these sisters were named Hayes, Middlesex, and Lowe. Everyone knew that the sisters individually were insane, and when gathered together, their madness pierced the sky. Looking at them, the young man said that a delegation of the Baskerville family had arrived, informing them that they had arrived for a tour of the area and a friendly exchange. Vire heard back that it was necessary to wait for the person in charge to allow entry. Hearing these words, the young man said that the landlord himself came here and they had no right to stop him, to which one of the girls asked if he ignored them as a landlord. Continuing to unnerve Vire, one of the sisters told the young man that he obviously didn't know the tenant protection law, despite it being the law of the Baskerville family. The young man replied that he had already made some changes to the law to evict the current tenants, and Staffordshire noticed an ominous aura emanating from the irritated Vire. Not wishing to wait any longer and have meaningless conversations, the young man said that he was warning the sisters for the last time and ordered them to open the gate. When the 3 sisters noticed Vire's aura, they realized that the young Baskerville was obviously not joking and might attack them. But not holding back her temper, one of the sisters unleashed her magic and replied that she had heard that the city of Underdog was run by some juvenile idiot. In the next instant, the girl released a warning stream of water right under Vire's feet in an attempt to scare him, but it only scared the horse he was sitting on. Then, calling the young man an ill-mannered swordsman, the sisters ordered him to wait as they had been told before, for one must not enter the lands of the Morgue family without asking. Suddenly, from behind Vire's back came voices that turned to the sisters and asked how dare they behave like that in front of this important man. When Vire heard this and turned back around, he was very surprised to realize that he had heard very familiar voices. Enraged, the sisters called the strangers henchmen and asked how these reckless idiots dared to stand up to them. At this moment, the 3 knights boldly stepped forward, preparing for the approaching battle with the Morgue family sisters. After taking off their hoods, the boys revealed their identities to everyone as Trident kin, and one of the brothers pointed at the young man and said that they, like Vire, were members of the Baskerville family. Turning around and looking at Vire, the three brothers said to trust them because they wanted to be helpful and had the power to deal with the sisters. The young man was obviously not happy about the help of his brothers because they irritated him madly since his previous life, and these emotions were read on his face. Looking at the brothers, Vire couldn't understand what the three were doing here and what was wrong with them, because before they wouldn't have thought of helping him even for a reward. Then one of the brothers came to the young man and asked him to trust them because they wanted to thank him for the recommendation to enter the academy. Now Vire realized the true intent of the triplets, for the brothers do not do anything for nothing, but they had no idea that he had taken them as his punching bag. Looking at them closely, the young man thought that later they would become his strongest weapon because despite the fact that they were stupid, they could cope with the instructions perfectly. After thinking about taming them and making them useful for his own purposes, Vire told his brothers that he would trust them this time, and the boys were very happy about it. The sisters then turned to Trident Baskervilles, calling them idiots and saying that they couldn't do anything without each other. The brothers did not choose their expressions either and called the sisters helpless idiots in response, which further fueled the conflict between them. Watching what was happening, Vire remembered that in his past life, the Morg triplets were known as the Three Sorceresses, and each possessed their own element. One of the Morg sisters possessed a powerful element of water that could easily descend upon the enemy and swallow them up. The second sister skillfully wielded the element of indestructible earth, which also gave the enemy no chance of escape. The last of the sisters possessed an element of a creative, benevolent yet cruel and ruthless nature. The combination of the three elements perfectly combined with each other, enhancing the magic of each of the sisters tenfold, and for this, they were nicknamed the Three Flowers of Morg. Through a combination of their elements of magic, the sisters immediately put up barriers in front of the brothers on the way to the castle, saying that they wouldn't be able to get through it. Taking his sword out of its scabbard and preparing to attack, one of the brothers said that these herbal sticks would not be an obstacle in their way. Possessing the first level of Baskervilles, the young man deftly cleaved the barrier in front of him with his sword without much difficulty. When Staffordshire saw this, he said that the young man was good at his skills because he had dealt with it with only one blow, but Vire disagreed with that man's opinion. However, after that, one of the tree vines whipped back at the young man, but he managed to block the attack without injuring himself. But the shockwave from the plant was so strong that it threw Hybro back, and he was once again next to his brothers. Meanwhile, the sisters standing above on huge tree shoots smirked haughtily and said that the brothers' pathetic swords wouldn't even be able to hurt them. Enraged by the girl's words, the brothers began to emit a sinister aura and prepared to attack those in full force because their ego had been hurt. Staffordshire asked Vire if he was having fun watching all this, but the young man didn't immediately understand what the man was talking about. He reasoned over who was stronger, mages or swordsmen, because with the help of mana, magic can reproduce the elements more strongly, and swordsmen use mana as fuel to create explosive power. Staffordshire was interested to see the potential of these young men and how they performed on the battlefield, as they would soon be leading families of swordsmen and mages. Thinking that it would be better if all 6 of the troubled triplets disappeared, Vire said that he should get this over with quickly as there was still much to discuss with the manager. Suddenly, there was an unknown voice asking what the brothers were doing in foreign territory, and a blob of fire elemental formed in that person's hand. Disregarding this warning, one of the brothers finally almost managed to get to one of the sisters and almost managed to attack her, but in the rush of anger and excitement, the young man did not notice the powerful stream of fire magic that was directed in their direction. Staffordshire was horrified at the whirlwind of flames that engulfed all 6 of the boys, but Vire smiled, hoping that all could be eliminated by this powerful attack. When the flames dispersed, the slightly burned brothers stood next to the young man, which he was not at all happy about, and they stared ahead, not understanding where the fire magic had come from. Thinking that one of the triplet sisters had done it, the brothers asked what she was doing since they could all be eliminated because of the fire. However, all the sisters were also shocked and shed bitter tears, saying that they could have been badly hurt, and they were scared. The girl who had unleashed such powerful fire magic, without listening to the complaints of the guys, once again asked what was going on here and why they were making such a ruckus. At that moment, Vire lifted his head up and looked at the girl standing on the edge of the wall with bewilderment and interest. This person turned out to be his longtime acquaintance, Camu Morg, who was clearly unhappy with the ongoing mess. With a contemptuous look at everyone, the girl said that she would not forgive anyone who made a mess on her territory. Jumping off the wall, Camu heard the sisters complaining that they didn't start it. They were only trying to stop the uninvited guests. Hearing that, one of the sisters addressed her by name, and Camu ordered her not to address her that way. Being frightened, the sister immediately corrected herself by calling her sub-superior, threatening her sisters to end up on one of the spikes surrounding the castle. The girl told them to be careful with their words, and they immediately apologized for their transgression. Then, turning to look at the uninvited guests, the girl immediately noticed among them a young Vyre sitting on a horse ahead of them all. A little embarrassed and smiling sweetly at the young man, Camus said that they had not seen each other for a long time because it had been about 7 years since their last meeting. Recognizing that little harmful and sassy girl in this girl, Vyre smiled and said hello to Camus Morgue. Having looked at the grown-up Camus, the young man realized that it was a girl famous in his past life for having stolen the hearts of all men of society, getting into scandals. But for some reason, in this life, there were no such rumors about her. Without giving the matter much thought, Vyre told her to open the doors since the triplets didn't want to negotiate. Not approving of the young man's indifference, Camus was outraged that those were all the words he wanted to say to her despite how many years they hadn't seen each other. Totally unaware of what the girl was talking about, Vyre asked her what else he had to tell her. Camus was inflamed by the lad's anger and stupidity, and Staffordshire thought that at this rate, there might be a bout of the strongest birthing children after the triplets bout. Pointing a finger at Vyre, Camus shouted that she gave him 0 out of 100 points for his inappropriate attitude towards his future wife. All the triplets made sour looks on their faces after hearing this because they obviously didn't want to hear this and participate in their lovemaking. Vyre was surprised and embarrassed because he had actually forgotten about the promise between them in the past and the fact that Camus was his fiancée. Soon, Vyre and Camus went to explore the territories, and the girl said that apparently, the Baskervilles knew little about the barbarians. But the young man replied that they knew more than the Morgs. Hearing the lad's answer, Camus asked why then Baskerville had sent such young and inexperienced hunting dogs here. After answering that it had already been agreed with the Morgs that the main part of the mines would be located in the mountains opposite, the young man asked why she was asking such questions. The girl smiled and said that she was checking him out because he could have been just a loser thrown out of his family. To which Vyre replied that he was in charge of the delegation. Then Camus asked which of the wild tribes was the most troublesome, and squinting at him, Vyre realized that she was still testing him by asking such tricky questions. The young man replied that the most dangerous were the tribe of Rococo shamans, and the tribe of Balak warriors, who had a level of arch far better than the Imperial. When Camus heard the answer, she said that she gave him 8 points out of 100 for good knowledge. Being indignant at such a low score, Vyre asked why she gave him so few points since he had answered well. After listening to the young man, the girl replied that she did not like smart men because they should be stupid, and since Vyre was smart enough, that's why he got such a low score. Then, having evaluated Vyre from head to toe, Camus gave another 6 points for writing, 4 points for style because his clothes were boring, and deducted 1 point for the guy's tackiness. But smiling warmly, the girl added 99 points for the young man's handsome face but deducted 1 point for his displeased expression. After hearing the assessment in his direction, Vyre said to stop doing nonsense, and Camus replied that it was not nonsense because she should be strict with her future husband. Looking at Camus, the young man asked why the girl considered him her husband, to which Camus replied that he had passed her uncle's test about 7 years ago. Vyre immediately recalled Adolphus Morg's test from 7 years ago, and was surprised that the girl still remembered the incident. Angry at Uncle Camus, she said that she should not choose her husband on such a principle because now, because of this promise, she would have to marry, which she did not particularly want. Turning to the girl, Vyre said that she could forget about the promise, and he too would pretend that nothing had happened, and thus their engagement would be null and void. Not expecting to hear such cold words from the guy, Camus became furious and threw a cloth in his face, saying that she would not forget about this promise. Taking offense at the young man and heading on to her destination, the girl said that she was a genius and just wouldn't be able to forget it. But Vyre ignored her words and asked what she had thrown at him. The young man realized that it was his jacket that he had given to Camus after their battle at the age of 8 so that she would not be embarrassed in front of everyone. Embarrassed, the girl did not answer what this thing was and called the young man an insensitive fool for forgetting such an important moment. Finally getting there, Camus began to fill the young man in on the situation, telling him that the barbarians were attacking the ruby mines, stealing local slaves, and plundering the crops. Approaching the high wall, the girl told the guy that this wall was built by mages of earth and iron. For a month, Vyre replied that the Morg mages were incredible because they had done in a month what it would have taken ordinary people a year to do, and Camus was pleased to hear her family praised. Then, turning his attention to the wall, the young man saw the marks on it, and inquired whether they were marks from the arrows of the Balaks, to which the girl confirmed the conjecture. The Balaks' arrows have a powerful aura, even penetrating walls 2 and 3 meters thick, and during night patrols, with their help, the barbarians eliminated a lot of people. Adolphus Morg received a serious chest wound from such an arrow that pierced the magic of the shield, but fortunately, his life was saved, just as Hugo was wounded on the bridge of his nose. Vire wondered who was such a genius among the barbarians, and Camus replied that it was most likely a girl, but it was hard to recognize because of the painted faces of those. At this moment, a man from the Morgue clan quickly approached the girl, addressing her as a sub-captain. Coming closer, Camus was told that the search party had caught Varvar, the scout, and that she needed to go there to interrogate him. When they arrived, they saw a viciously bound barbarian covered with necklaces and beads, his body covered with tattoos. Vire realized that he was from the Roko shamanic family, and Camus asked if she had already managed to get some information, but she was told that the barbarian did not want to say anything. Then Camus asked if her magic had been used, and she heard that it didn't work because of the powerful spells that made it impossible to reach minds. Afterwards, Camus came closer to Varvar and asked if he remembered the recent attack on the Morgue estate where several people had been kidnapped, but the prisoner did not answer. The girl, looking into the eyes of Varvar, said that among the kidnapped was her third cousin, Rose, and asked what had been done to her. To which the man replied in his own language without understanding a word. Camus asked her employee where the barbarian defectors were, but the girl replied that all had been eliminated or stolen during the barbarian attack. Camus realized that no one would be able to translate Varvar's speech now, and at that moment, Vire joined the conversation, saying that he knew a little of the Roko language. The girl was very surprised that the young man had such a skill as well, but Vire replied that he wasn't very good at it, and only knew basic vocabulary. Camus then asked the young man to find out from the barbarian where her sister was, a red-haired girl of 12 with red eyes, and he asked the man in Roko with a distraught look and a sinister appearance. The Roko barbarian replied something to the young man in his own language. Vire immediately understood what the man had told him and realized that these words would cause Camus terrible pain, for this information would not be comforting. Without turning to the girl, the young man said that her sister was no longer in this world, and Camus obviously did not expect to hear such terrible words. Coming to a frenzy, the girl said that all the higher officials were now absent, so being a subcap, she herself would make a decision regarding Varvar. Looking at the man, Camus said that her sentence would be the immediate and brutal execution of him, and unleashed her fire magic, burning in the infernal flames. The girl barbarian shouted something in her language, but the girl was ruthless and indestructible in her actions, saying that nothing else would save him. Watching the man's gruesome suffering, Camus said she would make sure that when the war was over, the barbarian language would only be spoken in hell. All the other captured barbarians were horrified at what they saw and at the cruelty of this young girl, for they did not suppose that this imperial beauty was capable of such a thing. Not waiting for the flames to die down, and only ashes left of Varvar, Camus headed for the exit and told everyone to leave the place. Looking at the girl, Vire immediately realized that she wasn't well and was going through a great emotional turmoil because of the loss of her sister. The young man decided to follow Camus, and leaving the tent, he saw that she had not gone far and was close by. The girl was crying quietly, trying to hold back her emotions, but Vire realized that she was pretending to be strong despite her young age and said that Camus was obviously close to her sister. Camus answered the young man that it was so, and her sister imitated her in many ways because Rose was a pure and kind child, not like the other members of the Morgue family. Then Vire said not to be sad, Camus, because now Rose rests carefree. The girl replied that she was a genius and not a fool because she herself understood all the words of Varvar. Hearing these words, the young man thought that the girl could really guess what the Roko tribe man was talking about. Then that mad and savage barbarian answered the young man that he would gladly eat Camus Morgue's sister. Unable to contain her emotions any longer, Camus cried with all her might at the realization of what a terrible fate had befallen her poor little sister. She couldn't stop sobbing and apologizing to Rose for failing to protect her, and Vire looked pityingly at Camus as if feeling the pain of her loss. For a moment, he brought his hand up to comfort the girl, but then changed his mind and took his hand off her shoulder, not wanting to stop Camus from venting her accumulated pain. Vire decided to give the girl a chance to let out all her emotions while standing behind her, and not leaving her for a second to help her in case of an emergency. Soon, Camus let out all the accumulated grief in her soul and calmed down, beginning to come to her senses and wiped the tears from her face. Realizing that Vire had been with her all this time, the girl said that he had done the right thing in not feeling sorry for her, so she quickly stopped moping because now she had to act. Looking at the girl, the young man saw that she was serious about revenge and eliminating all barbarians in her way. Thinking that the girl was being heroic by not letting the grief consume her completely, the young man held out his hand for her to get up. However, the moment Camus held out her hand to Vire, there was a sudden loud clang that took them by surprise. Rising from the ground, Camus angrily said that this signal warned everyone of a barbarian attack on Morgue territory. This call was indeed an alarm, for the barbarians had already come close to the walls of the morgue mines. Ahead of all the barbarians stood a mysterious young archer on a huge white wolf, preparing to fire her first arrow at her opponents. Making the first shot, the girl's arrow flew lightning fast towards the wall, splitting the air. At that moment, there were 2 guards on the wall who didn't notice such danger and continued their conversation. In the next moment, the archer's arrow pierced the stone wall and struck the guards, scattering stone blocks and shards everywhere. Then the girl shouted to the other barbarians some words in their language, and they instantly rushed to attack their opponents. The wild barbarians quickly infiltrated the terror and attacked the guards and mages there, eliminating them without a shred of pity. At that moment, Vyre arrived on the scene and saw the horror and mayhem going on around him. Observing the actions of the barbarians, the young man thought that they had penetrated the territory very quickly, which spoke of the considerable strength and agility of those. Suddenly, Vyre's musings were disturbed by a lasso heading in his direction. Before he knew it, 2 girls from the barbarian tribe had thrown a pommel around his neck and began to tighten the ropes, talking in their Baloch language. The girls discussed the extraordinary beauty of this young man and suggested that their hunt for a husband had been successful. Not wanting to be held hostage, Vyre put his hand firmly around the ropes and, realizing what they were talking about, assumed that the Balochs were hunting brides and grooms here for good offspring. Abruptly pulling the ropes with his hand, the young man threw the girls off the wolves on which they were sitting and said that he would not become their husband because it was not part of his plans. The huntresses fell to the ground with a thunderous crash, surprising their kin, for they could not stand against one young boy. The archers of the barbarian tribe who were watching this realized that the guy was not so simple and, mistaking him for an enemy, aimed their arrows at him. Vyre immediately grasped the hilt of his sword and remembered Hugo's admonition that the young man not engage the barbarians until the main army had joined. Deciding not to wait for reinforcements, and having exposed his sword, the young man quickly and deftly reflected all the arrows fired in his direction. Seeing how the guy repelled all the arrows with his sword, the barbarians were shocked, saying that he had done the impossible. At this moment, there was the voice of Camus, who released her fire magic and said that it was time to finish with these pathetic savages. A moment later, Vyre was faced with an impenetrable wall of flame engulfing their opponents and burning them to the ground. Burning in that merciless fire, the barbarians screamed in pain, saying something in their Baloch language. With a wary look at Camus, the young man thought that she had set up a sea of fire here, and the girl realized that Vyre possessed a liquid aura and had the power of a graduate. Camus then said that Vyre was the only man she could accept as a husband, and the young man said that the leader had ordered that they not engage until the army arrived. After listening to the boy, Camus replied that it was an order from the Baskerville, which she didn't obey, and so she would deal with it herself. Without Vyre releasing the Quadro spell, the girl directed her hellfire forward, which consumed everything in its path and burned out even the Zla itself. Looking at it, Bakir thought that the girl had become noticeably stronger because her Quadro spell was so powerful that it absorbed everything in its path. Telling the barbarians that they would be held accountable for what they had done to her sister, Camus concentrated her powers again and created a blob of flame in her hand. But suddenly, for the girl, one of the barbarians outran her attack and shot a poison dart at her. The dart hit Camus' neck, and she felt a sharp burning sensation in her body from the poison the dart had been treated with. The barbarian who had shot the Morgue Ares sat on a huge wild wolf, waiting for the effect of his attack. After a moment, Camus fell motionless to the ground, telling Vyre that her body was paralyzed and she could no longer move. After waiting for the desired effect, the guy from the barbarian tribe took out a rope, going to harness the paralyzed girl. But at that moment, Vyre interrupted the savage warrior by grabbing the rope with his hand and ordering him to stop. Then, looking at Camus, the young man said that it was worth retreating until the Baskerville's army arrived, but the girl was indignant because the prisoners and workers had to be rescued. Camus then said that she owed it to the barbarians to avenge her little sister and make them suffer. Continuing to hold the hunter's rope and resist him, Vyre told the girl to think rationally in this situation because the situation was heating up. Suddenly, the young man felt danger approaching and felt an arrow fly at the back of his head. Thanks to his agility, Vyre miraculously managed to dodge the arrow but let the enemy's rope out of his hand. Looking at his opponent, the young man saw a young girl from the barbarian tribe who was an archer, exuding a strong aura. Thinking about this girl with the destructive power that Camus was talking about, Vyre didn't notice the barbarian coming up behind him and shooting Camus. However, the guy's target was not Vyre himself but Camus Morgue, who he quickly grabbed by the scruff of the neck and took away with him. Looking at Vyre, the girl called out to him as she was immobilized, and clenching his teeth in anger, the young man looked at them, trying to think of a way to get Camus out of this situation. Looking at Camu's frightened face, Vire remembered that she had been captured by the barbarians in a previous life, but after eliminating them all with her own hands and returning, she had been named the Black-Red Queen. Before he could rush to Camu's aid, the young man was attacked again by the girl Varvara, who had almost approached him. The huntress attacked the boy with a powerful blow with her archery bow, but Vire miraculously managed to dodge it. Without delay, the girl began to strike the young man, disconcerting him by first attacking him with a battle bow and now turning to hand-to-hand combat. Taking advantage of the effective surprise and confusion of the guy, the huntress was able to deliver a strong kick with her foot right into the young man's stomach. From such a powerful blow, Vire was thrown back and realized that this girl moved differently than the rest of the barbarians, so he had to make an effort. But at that moment, the young man was suddenly surprised, for the huntress spoke to him, and he recognized her voice at once. Looking at Vire, the girl said that she had already known from their last meeting that they would meet again, and eventually they did. Behind the painted face and dangerous gaze was that poor and beaten barbarian girl whom the young man had released from the cage at the slave auction. Recognizing the girl, Vire was very surprised, for she looked different now, having a healthy and strong appearance. At the slave auction, she was badly exhausted and beaten, so she looked intimidated and weak. Then the guy asked the girl why she was repaying his kindness at the auction, and she replied that she had been enslaved by the Morgue family, and was now taking revenge on them. Jumping on her wolf, the huntress said that she had already caught the leader of the Morgue, and if he wanted to save his girlfriend, he should follow them. Vire hesitated as he thought of how to resist the barbarians without exposing all his strength, but at that moment, Adolphe Morgue and his mages were approaching them, and the young man could not reveal himself. Hearing the news of the attack on Camus, Adolphe immediately ran to save his niece and rushed to attack the opponents, ordering the barbarians to release his niece. The man unleashed his earth magic, and the entire cover under the feet of his opponents began to crumble. Thanks to her fast and wild wolf, the barbarian archer bypassed all the obstacles in her way and escaped from the scene. The rest of the Balacs also managed to escape Adolphe Morgue's attack and got out of sight, for their wolves were very strong and fast animals. Looking after them, the enraged man shouted and cursed those who could not save his favorite niece from being kidnapped. Vire didn't expect the battle to end 3 minutes after the alarm. Apparently, the situation was exacerbated by Q's lack of practice and inattention. At that moment, one of the mages who had approached Adolphe informed him that the barbarians had apparently fled to the uncharted region of the Red-Black Mountain. The man was horrified because this area was a place of unbridled and uncharted dangers, so the chance of Camus being rescued was minimized. Turning to Adolphe, Vire confidently said that the Balacs could still catch up, which surprised the man and the mage standing next to him. Remembering the experience of search and submission from his past life and knowing most of this dense forest, the guy said he had been there as a child and could help in rescuing the girl. Grabbing the guy by the shoulders, Adolphe Morgue asked if the guy was really serious and willing to help save Camus. However, the subordinate mage turned to Adolphe, saying that it was very dangerous to go into this territory at night, but the man replied that he could go without him. Adolphe Morgue was sure that this young man was special, and in this situation, he was the only hope of saving his niece. Without wasting precious time, Camus's rescue party soon reached the dense forest of Red-Black Mountain located near Baskerville Manor. This forest concealed a lot of terrible secrets, creepy and dangerous creatures, mosquitoes, mutants capable of sucking out of the human body everything down to the bones, huge venomous spiders moving silently through their webs, and a normal person would not be able to stay here for an hour. Also dangerous to humans are poisonous thorny vines, and this place has been nicknamed as the forest that consumes life. But despite all these dangers, Vire rushed ahead of the whole squad without a drop of fear, paving the way to safety. Following the young man, Adolphe asked Stepfordshire if all the sons of Baskerville were so special, to which the man replied that it was not possible for all to be so. Suddenly, 2 giant wild wasps appeared on the guy's path, which were not friendly and wanted to attack the young man. In the blink of an eye, Vire chopped those without stopping in his tracks, making it clear to all of Reflection that he was an exception to all the rules and a special young man. Following brother Trident, Baskerville marveled at Vire's skills, and all the brothers said that he was a very cool person. Suddenly, the young man stopped and lurked behind a powerful tree, signaling to the group not to move on. Pointing the way forward, Vire said he'd heard information that the Balacs sprinkled dry leaves on the ground to hear their pursuers. Realizing that he had to move carefully, Adolphe Morgue cast a silence spell on the young man so that he would not be noticed by his opponents. The man looked at the boy and explained that this magic would help him move silently. Adolphe then said he would go on alone and would never forget the kindness of his son-in-law, but Vire didn't expect to hear the man call him that. The lad had indeed found the location of the Balacs, where they were resting after the hunt, gathered around the fire and rejoicing in their success. Meanwhile, Camus, tied to a tree, kept screaming, calling the barbarians hurtful and rude words and saying that she would kill them all as soon as she got out. Without listening to the screams of the captive, the tribal girls continued to talk about Vire, for they liked him very much, but the hunt for her husband was not successful. Tired of shouting and recognizing some of the girls' words, Camus realized that they were talking about some kind of hunt for her husband. Reflecting on this, Camus assumed that she and the others were captives captured for the sake of producing good offspring, as those wanted to dilute their blood. At that moment, the hunter who immobilized her scrutinized the girl and said in his language that the males of his tribe would like her very much. The girl suspected something was wrong and shouted that he did not come to her, but the guy did not understand what she said but looked at her with interest. After answering her that he didn't understand a word, the hunter grabbed Camus' face and said that the girl's eyes showed that she was a rebel. Taking out a sharp arrow and ominously looking at the girl, the guy said that this insolent slave girl should be taught a lesson. At that moment, the head archer approached them and calling the guy by the name of Aun, ordered him to get away from her slave girl. Addressing the girl as Chief Ion, the hunter said that it was he who had caught the slave girl, to which Ion replied that he should not lie to her, for she had seen everything for herself. Aun became indignant because it was he who shot the girl with a dart and put a noose on her, but the chief replied that he had done it thanks to her because she had saved her from a dangerous young swordsman. Camus was watching the barbarians, not realizing that they were arguing about her and figuring out whose property their slave was. Aun said that Ion is a girl, so this slave girl should not be of interest to her as breeding, but the chief replied that it did not matter. Aun realized that this girl was a leader, and that she was so strong that she could resist even a Vire with a graduate level. Not wanting to give Camus to the chief, Aun said that her stubbornness was unforgivable, and hearing this, Ion became furious at his stubbornness and threatened to kill him. The girl replied that since the guy is so insistent, she will not hold back and will wipe him into powder. Right at that moment, realizing that Chief Ion was angry and he might actually get hurt, the hunter immediately backed off, saying he no longer insisted on getting this slave girl. When the disgruntled Aun left, the girl Camus, who had been watching their conflict, realized that the girl Ion had won their argument. Then looking at the prisoner, the chief said that the future leader of the Morgue family had a good physique and a good pedigree, but Camus didn't understand what she was saying. Not expecting danger from the archer, Camus was kicked in the shoulder, and then Aun continued her speech, saying that the Morgue family had captured her and sold her into slavery. However, at that moment, the girl was very lucky because she was rescued and released from the cage into the wild by a young swordsman unknown to her. Without removing her foot from Camus' shoulder, the chief said that she would not have such luck because she would slowly and leisurely take the soul out of the slave's body. Not understanding all the words of the girl Varvara, Camus realized that the girl was very hostile towards her and that she was in great danger. Suddenly, at that moment, an unexpected explosion sounded behind her back. The explosion sent everything behind her into a state of shock. The confused leader quickly turned around to see what had caused the explosion, and Camus looked closely to determine what was wrong. The barbarian who had been hit by the explosion and engulfed in flames screamed in terrible pain, while the surviving hunters from the tribe warned everyone of the attack, preparing to defend themselves. Then, a silhouette of a man appeared from behind a wall of flame, saying that he had come to repay his debt to the barbarians and take revenge on them. When Camus heard this voice, she immediately rejoiced because she recognized that this man was her uncle, Adolphe Morgue, who had come to rescue her. Creating a blob of flame in his hand, Adolphe intimidatingly ordered the barbarians to let his niece go, or they would see no mercy. Not expecting such visitors and an attack at such a late hour, the barbarians were shocked and confused. The mages who followed Adolphe began to attack and eliminate their wildling opponents without pity. At this time, Vire climbed up a tall tree to start stealthy action, watching the fight. The young man wondered why the hunters who periodically attacked the fearless Baika were so frightened at this moment, for they had been quite assertive earlier. The girls from the tribe who had jumped on their wolves to escape were outraged that their enemies had caused such a commotion at night in the dense forest. Seeing that the barbarians were trying to escape, Adolphe ordered the mages and swordsmen to catch up and mercilessly eliminate every last one of them. Rejoicing at the unexpected appearance of backup and their clear advantage in strength, Camus said that the vile barbarians were sure to get what they deserved. Immediately after her words, there was a crunch of twigs from behind the tree that frightened the girl, and the smile disappeared from her face. It was Vire, who looked out from behind a tree and gestured for Camus to be quieter, but she shouted his name. In the next instant, the guy cut the ropes restraining the girl's body and freed her. Overjoyed at Vire's appearance, Camus asked if he had come for her, But ignoring the question, the young man said that the girl had to keep quiet so as not to attract the attention of their opponents. At that moment, Ian noticed the young man's appearance, and snuck up on them, telling Vire that she was sure the skilled swordsman would come to rescue the morgue. Ares, the archer, said that a young man with such physical prowess and willpower to traverse the darkness of the dense forest was clearly willing to sacrifice his life for his beloved. With a smile looking at Vire, Ian said that they would leave the past events in the past because now the guy had definitely passed. Cautiously looking at the archer, the young man did not understand what she meant by saying that he had passed. Then the chief looked at Camus Morgue with dislike, and she looked back at Ian with anger, as if a spark of hatred had passed between them. Supporting the weakened Camus, the guy didn't understand why he didn't have any memories from his past life of Chief Ian and wouldn't be able to unleash his skills now. Looking at the girl, Vire speculated that she might be the same Balak archer called Night Fox, who had injured the bridge of Hugo's nose and left a scar on his face. As he continued to speculate, the young man thought that she might still be a relative of Night Fox because she was too young. At that moment, he didn't notice the danger creeping up from outside. A released poison dart flew at Camus again, but Vire reacted in time and fought it off with the demonic sword in his hand. The Shaktakun, who shot at the girl, was astonished by the actions and agility of the young man, not understanding how he managed to repel such a precise and silent attack. Without waiting for the next blow, Vire said that the situation was already getting complicated and lifted Camus in his arms, preparing to run away. The young man asked the girl to be patient for a little while because he would take her to her uncle. Embarrassed by his unexpected actions, Camus blushed and obediently agreed. The next moment, Vire, with Camus in his arms, disappeared from the gaze of the Ian chieftain, but the archer did not stop him or block his path. Sighing heavily and lowering her head, Ian got a little upset and said that she really wanted to take this guy for herself. Leaving the scene, Vire asked Camus if she was poisoned, and the girl said that the poisoning was really strong. Suddenly, their conversation and escape were interrupted by the Balak girls shooting their arrows at them to prevent their escape. Vire reacted instantly, supporting Camus with one hand while fending off all the arrows with his other hand using his sword. Then Ian regretted letting the Morgs go so easily and pulled the bowstring, releasing an arrow determined to get rid of her. Continuing to run away with the girl in his arms, Vire clearly sensed danger and an approaching arrow behind them. Turning around sharply to prevent the attack, the young man realized that the arrow was flying purposefully towards Camus and not at him. The girl also turned to look and realized that the arrow was about to catch up with her, and they wouldn't be able to dodge it. However, suddenly the arrow froze right in front of Camus' face because it was stopped by an ice wall in which it froze and hovered just centimeters away from the girl's face. Adolf Mord was the one who stopped the arrow in time to save his niece from it at the last moment. Fearing for Camus' life, the man shouted and asked if she was okay, and the girl responded, letting him know that she was fine. After Vire delivered Camus, Adolf used healing magic and told her that the paralyzing poison in her body was very powerful and getting it out of her system would be difficult. Continuing to heal his niece, the man said that when they returned home, they would visit the sacred Quoist family to heal her completely. Suddenly, Camus took away her uncle's hand and stopped the healing process, telling him to wait a bit. Feeling better, the girl instantly stood up and made her way to Vire's neck, thanking him for saving her again. Adolf was taken aback by his niece's action. Trying to draw the girl's attention to himself, the man said that he too had done his best, but not hearing him, Camus began to complain about the young man for coming so late. While the girl was showing her displeasure and whims to the young man, a rope was thrown around Vire's neck again, which he was very surprised at because he thought they had gotten away from the barbarians. The attacker was once again Chief Ian, who had managed to tighten the noose around his neck, thus harnessing the boy. Realizing that the guy was very strong because the rope didn't stretch at all, the archer told him to give up quickly because she had no time left. Outraged, Camus said that again this girl had appeared in front of them, and Vire, meanwhile, broke the rope with his hands and wondered why she had no time. The very next moment, the boy realized that the barbarians had good reason to hurry and get out of this part of the forest. Seeing the birds fly away from someone and sensing danger coming, Ian said that they had been spotted. Even the powerful demonic sword Bebub in Vire's hand sensed the eerie and dangerous atmosphere around him. Looking deep into the forest, Chief Ian said she had come, and Vire immediately wondered who could have come into this forest, and who the barbarian girl was so afraid of. Suddenly, from the forest arose a huge column that soared upward, piercing the heavens, and the archer said that the eight-legged lady had come. The other barbarians and even the huge wild wolf were frightened by the coming of the eight-legged mistress, and grimaces of fear froze on their faces. Camus was also horrified at the sight of this huge column, and Vire, looking at this sight, already had his suspicions about who might have appeared in this creepy and dangerous forest. This powerful column then branched into 8 thinner ones and took on an even more intimidating appearance, spreading across the forest. After that, all 8 columns sank to the ground, forming the limbs of a huge monster that still hadn't shown its face. All present could not believe their eyes, and Adolf said that he could not imagine that such a monster was hiding in a dense forest. Tensing at the imminent danger, Vire thought about the fact that he had no idea he would meet this monster in a place like this. Relying on his memories, the young man realized that they had met the 8-legged mistress, who was one of the most dangerous monsters in this world with the highest level. Leaving its hiding place, the huge spider showed itself fully and bared its fangs, angrily howling and directing its piercing scream at everyone present. Camus was frightened and started to scream, asking what kind of monster it was, but Vire immediately covered her mouth, whispering that she shouldn't scream because it would attract the mistress's attention. It was impossible to shout because the 8-legged mistress could not see well, but her hearing was acute, and she could sense everything. The young man still remembered the words from his past life from a local who said that there was a legend of a horror that inhabited the forest wilderness called the 8-legged mistress. After that, even in the Imperial Dictionary of Monsters, the name of the 8-legged mistress was added so that people would know about the existence of such a terrifying monster and be wary of it. A monster capable of destroying an entire country. The monster howled once again, spewing a thick green slime from its mouth everywhere. This slime turned out to be a poisonous acid capable of instantly poisoning and destroying anything it came across. Realizing the consequences, Vire skillfully dodged all the slime flying in his direction, while Adolf covered himself and Camus with a magical shield to keep the slime out. At the same time, the poisonous slime got on Ian's hair, and he screamed at the top of his voice in fright. Suddenly, his long side was split by a sharp blade, and the part of the side sprinkled with poison fell to the ground. After helping the tribesman, Chief Ian aggressively whispered to the one to shut his mouth and not dare to shout in front of the 8-legged lady. Fearing that after screaming they might be spotted by the huge spider, the girl thought that if the guy wasn't the shaman's grandson, she would personally eliminate him right now. Realizing that the mistress had heard the boys scream and was heading in their direction, Ian ordered all the barbarians to quickly retreat and get the hell away from there. Picking up his niece in his arms, Adolf in a muffled voice also addressed his squad, ordering everyone to run away from the monster. Not hearing the loud noises, the 8-legged mistress sharpened her senses to see where the intruders had gone, and to take revenge on them. However, the slight difference in the fugitives' retreat helped the mistress decide who she would pursue, and she set off in pursuit of her prey. They were being pursued by the Camomord rescue squad, and running away from the creepy monster, Adolf asked why it was following them and not the barbarians. At that moment, one of the Morg mages expressed his desire to confront the spider, telling Adolf to rely on him because the insect monster's weakness was fire. Releasing his magic, the guy directed a powerful stream of flame directly into the mouth of the creepy monster, and there was an explosion. Satisfied with his bravery, the arrogant mage thought he had succeeded in stopping the 8-legged mistress with such a minor attack. Before Adolf could boast of his success, he fell silent, for the mage standing next to him was pierced by one of the spider's paws and lifted up. After seeing this, the guy froze in fear, and tears appeared in his eyes because he saw his comrade brutally eliminated by the monster. Not stopping and continuing to run away from the mistress, Adolf Morg never stopped wondering how such a creature could even exist in this world. Vire, who had been following the man, thought for a moment, and realized that he had to finish this or the monster would not leave them. The young man stopped abruptly and turned towards the 8-legged mistress, shocking everyone with his action. Stopping, Stepfordshire asked what the guy was doing, and Vire replied that if they kept running away like this, they would all be eliminated, so someone should tie the monster's legs together. The man replied that he would stay, but the young man said that with his powers, it was unlikely he would be able to bind this powerful monster. Disappointed by his decision, Vire said that they could not bring the mistress to their territory, and that the best solution now would be to bind her feet. Taking his sword out of its scabbard, the guy said he would stop this dangerous monster, and, pointing to Adolf Morg, for lack of time, ordered the squad to flee once again. Hearing Vire's order for them to flee, Adolf, with Camus and the squad, rushed away, and the man said he would not let his son-in-law's sacrifice be in vain. When Vire stopped hearing Camus' cries for him to return to her and run away, the young man let go of the hilt of his sword and sighed heavily. After thinking that the lady was clearly not interested in destroying the Basil lands and that a united army could stop the underdeveloped monster, the young man realized that this was his chance. Vire thought that under the pretense of being eliminated by the 8-legged mistress, he would be able to disappear from Hugo's supervision and have time to learn the 10th level of the Baskerville. The young man decided that when he got this power, which even the head of the family did not possess, he would learn to control and hide it, and then return to his family. Realizing that if he didn't use his full power, he might actually be eliminated by the lady, Vire released Bebub and all the skills absorbed by him. Soon, the eight-legged mistress caught up with the young man and was ready to tear him apart. But Vire was already prepared to bravely take the fight. At this point, Vire possessed a strengthened body from the waters of the river Styx, wielded the more powerful swordsmanship style of Baskerville, and had the demonic sword Bebub. Combining all these powerful attributes, the young man was going to put everything he had into his punch so that he would not come out of this fight a loser. Having developed lightning speed, the guy began to push off from tree to tree in order to gain altitude and attack the monster from the air. Pushing off the last tree and soaring upwards, Vire concentrated, ready to deliver a crushing blow to his dangerous opponent. Seeing the huge and intimidating eight-legged mistress in front of him, the guy rushed towards her creepy mouth with huge fangs, putting all his strength and power into this strike and applying the 5th level of Baskerville. Vire swung and attacked the monster. A powerful stream of aura and energy pierced the mistress, and from it came a huge shockwave that spread throughout the entire area of the dense forest. After the guy's attack, there was a bright and piercing beam of light that illuminated the entire forest and pointed to the place where a powerful explosion had just occurred. A wall of purple acrid light reminiscent of blood engulfed the forest grove, signaling to Camus and Adolphe Morgue that it was all over for either of the two fighters. Looking into the distance at the ashes and the glow that had just appeared, the girl cried and shouted Vire's name, realizing that she would never be able to see her fiancé again. The next thing that arose in Vire's mind was the moment of his execution when the sharp blade of the guillotine hovered over his neck, and mere seconds separated him from death. Before his eyes stood the ruthless Hugo Leeserville and his retinue, who stared coldly at him and awaited the execution of judgment. Then the man raised his hand and made the sign that meant he could proceed with the execution of his hound dog, Vire. When the execution was complete and Vire's soul had not yet left his body, the last memory was of Hugo turning around and walking away. Soon, Vire opened his eyes and regained consciousness, not realizing what had happened. After looking around him, the young man realized that he didn't know the place and didn't know where it was. As he began to remember a little, the guy reasoned about how long ago his fight with the mistress had happened and how amazing it was that the monster had not been able to eliminate him. Vire realized that if the mistress hadn't slowed down at the most crucial moment because of the striking light, he would most likely have already gone to the other world. As he stood up, the guy realized that he had surprisingly gotten away with shock and some minor muscle and vascular damage, but the bones were fortunately intact. Noticing the rope around his neck, the young man realized why he got sick during the battle with the creepy spider, but thanks to that, he managed to survive. Remembering the members of the rescue squad and Camus, Vire thought that he had managed to hide from Hugo's eyes and that his plan had worked because there were many witnesses. After thinking over everything that had happened, the young man went outside the dwelling, and the bright sun blinded him for a moment. Seeing barbarians everywhere, the young man realized he was in a village of the Balak tribe, observing their way of life and daily routine. Vire guessed that the Balak had taken over. Without noticing what was going on behind his back, the guy thought that in such a state with a wounded body, he would not be able to escape from here. Vire heard a scream and saw a tribeswoman leading the slaves away, ordering them to move quickly if they didn't want to become dinner for the wolves. Covering his face to remain unseen, the boy saw that among the slaves were warriors of the Morgue and Baskerville clans. When he saw them pass by him, he wondered why he had not been taken to the verdict. At that time, someone approached him from behind. A hunter from the Balak tribe addressed the young man, asking if he knew their language. Vire turned around to see who had spoken to him. When he saw Balak, he recognized him immediately, for he had fired a poison dart at Camus Morgue several times. Noticing that Vire was watching the captives closely, Akun told the boy to be thankful that he wasn't treated the same way. Then, leaning over to the boy, Balak suggested that he watch the execution of his comrades, for with such a wounded body, it would be impossible to save them. Akun grinned wickedly and said that if the guy wasn't the commander's favorite dog, he would have been boiled in a cauldron long ago. Hearing that he was called a dog, Vire remembered his old nickname from his past life when he had to be a hunting dog. The worst of his past life was remembering Hugo Leeserville, who had shrouded his life in chains and ultimately betrayed him. Suddenly, anger enveloped the young man, and with eyes glowing with rage, he glared menacingly at Balak. Unable to bear such insolence and stubbornness from the boy, Akun immediately slapped him in the face. Then the guy turned around and walked away from Vire, lying on the ground and telling him to look for his master at the other end of the rope. Rising from the ground, the young man said he had memorized Akun's face and would get even with him when his health was fully restored. Vire then went in search of the man at the other end of the rope, wondering why the rope was so long. As he continued on his way, the young man kept wondering who his master was among the Balak and how long it would take to get there. Soon, the noose around his neck tightened, and the boy saw the man in front of him holding the other end of the rope. It was the now familiar Ian, sitting in a small pond submerged almost completely headfirst in it. In the next instant, the girl dived slightly out of the water and approached Fire, who was at a loss for what was happening. Ian told the guy to bend over, but he was surprised at the girl's request and didn't budge. Seeing no submission from the young man, the girl pulled the rope sharply, and Fire had to bend over against his will. Suddenly, there was a noise, and an arrow slammed into a tree near the lake, disrupting their conversation. It was the Balak children, who had been ordered by the girl to train elsewhere.